curiously. It seems I can start to consider myself a prophet. Only a little time has passed since the deployment of observation stations in the territory of the Narn regime, and our secretive friends have already managed to send their ships to one of these systems. 3 spider-like shadow cruisers came out of hyperspace on the outskirts of the Zoc system, located on the exact same outskirts of Narn space. What is characteristic, common sense still prevailed over unprovoked aggression. As soon as 3 of my ships appeared in the system, the shadows suddenly hit the brakes. The Kataki detected a stream of scanning radiation coming from the lead cruiser, and then, as silently and quickly as it had appeared, the enemy disappeared from the material universe, leaving the system at maximum speed. Given the radiation absorption capabilities of replicators, the shadows, clearly not having received any informational data during the scan, preferred to simply leave the English way without engaging in combat with someone whose characteristics and real capabilities they did not know. Well, that means we should expect a courtesy visit in the near future. It only remains to understand where exactly this visit will be paid, to Babylon 5 or to the planet I have chosen. On the one hand, this station is a diplomatic facility, and holding a diplomatic meeting here makes much more sense and logic. Besides, even a shallows can't fly near the planet. On the other hand, I would be happy to see how exactly and in what composition the delegation of the most secretive civilization in this part of the galaxy will sign up for an audience with me. Lord Baal, Korone transmitted over the network. Yuki and I have made a decision. I'm listening. All the simulations of the process that we have conducted and all the theoretical calculations carried out by the network allow us to confidently state the safety of the process of changing the physical platform. Are you sure? I'm asking again just in case. I can still construct a simple, separate technomagic module for you without changing your entire bodies. The probability of success is 98.974%, the Neki replied. With such a forecast, to refuse such a radical increase in one's own efficiency, Korone fell silent for a moment, and then a simply phenomenal level of sarcasm and indignation broke through in her voice, the likes of which I had not heard for a long time. Even for you, such an act would be beyond all conceivable concepts of stupidity and absurdity. We have made a decision, Lord Baal. Yuki joined her sister. I understand you. All was left was to accept their choice, made quite consciously, and give the command to the replicators to conduct a cycle of final checks of the finished bodies for the girls, made entirely using the same technology as my own. The testing was successful, and 24 minutes later, having received my fatherly blessing, the Neki stood before me in the cabin, ready to go to the laboratory complex. Having made sure from the surveillance cameras in the corridor that there were no unwanted witnesses, I blocked the door to the cabin and, making a wide gesture with my hand, gave the command to the replicator blocks in one of the walls to reconfigure and unlock the Stargate. Another second and the sound of an opening passage rolled through the cabin. The transition from the station to the laboratory at the opposite end of the galaxy looked exactly the same as for the junior replicator during the test run of a little more than 1.5 seconds of non-existence, and before my eyes, and then the eyes of the girls, appeared the hall of the gate at the other end of the wormhole. Moving around the territory of the laboratory, although it had impressive areas, was even simpler. The white beam of the Asgard teleportation device transferred us directly to the laboratory, where new bodies for Korone and Yuki were created and tested. Then it was just a matter of technique. In principle, the process of transferring the consciousness, that is, the information personal matrix of each of the girls to the new receptacles intended for this could have been carried out directly from Babylon 5. Being literally part of the replicator network, there was no fundamental difference for them what information to drive through this network, although this does not include the issue of disposal of old bodies. But still, I preferred to play it safe and be present during the transfer personally, since, despite the almost 100% chance of success, emotions of some uncertainty and carefully hidden fear were heard from the girls through the replicator network. In general, we are responsible for those whom we created, trained and fed with cakes. Yes. The Neki exchanged glances of mutual support, looked at me in unison, and, after receiving an affirmative nod, independently gave the command to the replicator network to start the transfer process. The next moment, the old android platforms went limp, remaining standing only due to the design features, and long 0.143 seconds flowed by while the information packets with the girls' personalities took their proper places, adapted to the new functions and generally fused together. Finally, Korone, and after an indistinguishable fraction of a second, Yuki, shuddered, sitting up on the laboratory pedestals and opening her eyes. Externally, the girls looked exactly the same as before the transfer. The basic appearance of the nanite bodies was absolutely identical to the previous androids, but now, in addition to everything else, they received the ability to freely change the configuration and take on any required appearance. Welcome back. I look at the neck with a smile, making sure via the replicator network that the process went smoothly and no unexpected side effects appeared. How do you like the new sensations?
Unusual. Korone looked thoughtfully at her right hand, above the palm of which, at her command, a small fireball created with the help of a technomagic module thickened from the air. Thank you very much. Yuki was still slightly behind her more developed sister, but after the transfer of the personal matrix, the difference became much less noticeable, which was perfectly confirmed by the sincere emotion of embarrassed gratitude reflected on the girl's face and in the replicator network. The process went smoothly. The senior Neki finally nodded with satisfaction. The new platform is much more perfect. I like it. Finally, you did something reasonable and useful. The girl was embarrassed for a moment and then, thank you. Korone easily jumped to the floor and her lips touched my cheek. Interesno. This was already a much more noticeable manifestation of a full-fledged consciousness than everything that existed before. And yes, here it is. Despite the constant connection with the network, initially her personality was still stored in the platform itself, which imposed certain restrictions in terms of local productivity, and as a result, the speed and limits of the development of herself. Now, in a new body. With an interested smile, I watched how avalanche-like the process of completing a full-fledged personality in Korone's eared head became. A personality fully aware of itself, its place in the replicator network and in the surrounding world. And after her sister, Yuki also evolved, opening her eyes in surprise for a moment and pricking up her ears. The girl seemed to wake up from a long sleep, starting to look around. I hope I haven't just created a local analog of Skynet. Don't worry, Lord Baal, Korone answered my thoughts. Your fears and the analogy with the crazy artificial intelligence from an old science fiction film of the 20th century Earth are completely unfounded. We are not going to destroy organic life in the galaxy. Who will bake the cakes then? To the sound of the two sisters' laughter, I felt my body, made of microscopic and virtually indestructible nanites, twitch an eye. Again. It seemed I had created monsters, and it was wonderful. Interlude. Cynthia Torkeman, one of the lead reporters for Interstellar News, an Earth television show, sat comfortably in a chair in the Centauri Republic Embassy quarters on Babylon 5. When the channel's management first announced that they were going to send a film crew to the station and do an exclusive program there, covering the daily life of the most famous and controversial space station in all the surrounding systems, the woman could not even imagine that almost immediately upon arrival, she would become a witness to almost real military action. And that is exactly what happened. One of the Narn ships, having arrived at Babylon, suddenly changed course for no apparent reason and attacked a Centauri transport, which at that very moment was approaching the docking station. Of course, the first thing she did as soon as her foot stepped on the deck was head to the embassy sector. Fresh and hot news from each of the parties was the most valuable resource in her work. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ambassador Mollari. Cynthia sat down in one of the chairs opposite the Centauri ambassador. I hope I was not too pushy in my desire to talk to you. I understand you perfectly, Miss Torkeman, Londo replied with a routine smile. Reporters and breaking news, it's like a glutton and a hot bun. You can't keep one away from the other. Oh yes, the woman laughed, signaling the cameraman to start filming. An excellent metaphor, Ambassador. But, if you will allow me, now while the trail is still hot, what can you tell us about the tragic incident with your transport at the docks? This is definitely a provocation. Londo Mollari spread his hands, leaning back on the sofa. The nuns are jeopardizing the very purpose of Babylon 5. After all, this station was always intended to find peaceful solutions to conflicts, to be able to negotiate in a civilized manner. We saw what happened, Ambassador Mollari. The female reporter nodded sympathetically. I can't judge the reasons, but the fact that a nun ship attacked a Centauri transport at the entrance to the Babylon's dock is indisputable. That's what I'm telling you, they used the station's neutral territory to settle scores with our people. Londo threw up his hands. I don't deny that there is a war between the Narns and the Centauri, but that's no reason. The Centauri pilot wasn't even thinking about attacking. He was trying to steer the ship away. How many of your citizens died?
I haven't received the list of the dead yet, the ambassador shook his head. But in any case, we mourn all those killed and injured in this attack. The Narns' actions are outrageous. So you're saying that the attack was unprovoked? It's incredible to imagine that it happened like this, completely without reason. Of course unprovoked, Lando smiled sadly. The Narns, even in the best times of their race, were not renowned for their common sense and integrity, Miss Torkeman. It's hard to believe, the woman sighed. But there's no reason not to believe you either. I'm sincerely grateful to you for the conversation, Ambassador Malari. Cynthia rose from her chair. It's incredibly valuable to receive comments immediately after an event. As my experience shows, they are often much more truthful than all the subsequent official versions. I was glad to be of service to you. Malari also stood up. I hope that with your help, we will finally be able to convey the true state of affairs to the galactic community. The journalist nodded in agreement, gathering her equipment and beckoning the cameraman to follow. In all fairness, she should have gotten exactly the same first comments from the Narn ambassador Jakar, but she had already sent the request and received a reply from the ambassador's attaché, Natoth, that the representative of the Narn regime did not intend to give any comments to the press before consulting with his government. As a rule, this meant that the party to the conflict, definitely knowing something about what had happened, was going to form a coherent and consistent official position, with which it would then go public. Well, she had time. The broadcast was scheduled for 36 hours, and a lot could be done in that time. Who's next, John? Cynthia turned to the operator, who was patiently awaiting further instructions. Of all the requests, only Lord Baal and Captain Sheridan responded. The man checked his tablet, and the rest are silent for now. Lord Baal. No, we'll save the Goa'uld ambassador for dessert. Torkeman nodded to her thoughts. The plan of action is to quickly go through the Babylon personnel, dockers, repairmen, dispatchers, in short, a scattering of small plots everywhere from where they won't chase us away. Yeah, the operator nodded. Then we go to the captain, the host continued thoughtfully. If by that time Ambassador Jakar deigns to think of something to say to us, we'll talk to him. If not, we'll go to Lord Baal. Good afternoon, Miss Torkeman. Sheridan nodded to the TV presenter, putting aside the tablet with the report he was looking through at that moment. How is your visit to the station going? I hope you haven't tormented all my employees. The captain smiled, and even sincerely, showing that the question was not a complaint. Although Cynthia understood perfectly well, many years of experience showed that with exactly the same smile, the commander of Babylon 5 would throw her out, along with the operator and all the equipment on the first slow-moving transport, as soon as her work became an obstacle to the work of the station. But this was the order of things, and the woman had long ago resigned herself to this and even found some pleasure in testing the strength of the patience of those around her at such moments. The main thing was only to subtly grasp that line, after crossing which problems began. To grasp it and not cross it, of course. I hope not. The woman smiled back, sitting down in the guest chair on the other side of the table. Good afternoon, Captain. Forgive me if I'm interrupting you from your work, but…
You understand. Cynthia spread her hands. The news won't film itself, and this program could serve as excellent advertising for Babylon. I know. Advertising is popularity, popularity is tourists, and tourists… John sighed. Are an extra couple of credits for the budget. Capitalism. Torkeman shrugged. Well, if you have no objections, can we begin? Of course. The captain nodded, settling more comfortably in his chair. First of all, the woman nodded, having made sure that the operator had started recording. Could you just describe Babylon 5 and your work on it in 2 or 3 words? The station is of course well known in Earth space, but I am sure that many do not fully understand what exactly is happening here. Well, Sheridan thought for a second. There's a joke, an old one. You don't have to be crazy here, but a little phase shift wouldn't hurt. Like any large facility in space, Babylon has its problems. The man spread his hands. A large number of people and aliens, different species, different traditions and cultures. Some clashes and mutual misunderstandings are simply inevitable. Is it really that bad? Not bad, no. Rather difficult. But you know, the captain smiled,
There is a certain charm in walking on the razor's edge. For such emotions, many join the army. New frontiers. New frontiers? The camera turned to Cynthia, and the presenter raised her eyebrows with a smile. That's for sure. When Babylon 5 was first commissioned, no one could have imagined that the station would work for so long. I remember, the woman checked a small tablet. Insurance companies from Los Angeles to London predicted that it wouldn't last even 6 months. Just imagine. Bets were made with odds worse than 200 to 1.
I've never been into fortune-telling.
Sheridan chuckled. Just as I never went to bookmakers. I just didn't have the time. As far as we know, you were previously a starship captain? Cynthia asked the next question. Yes, Agamemnon, a great ship, one of the first Omega-class cruisers built after the war. We mostly patrolled, chased pirates, sometimes carried out diplomatic missions. Well, you know, worlds of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, visits of friendship, and all that. And now, there are rumors that, in addition to Babylon 5, you are also listed as the commander of some ship? That's a bit unusual. You're right, the man smiled. But think for yourself. Babylon 5 is, of course, first and foremost a diplomatic station, located in a neutral area of space. It was conceived precisely for this purpose, to serve as a place where representatives of completely different nations, even those hostile to each other, could meet and try to resolve any disagreements that had arisen calmly and safely for both sides. But on the other hand, Sheridan sighed, we are far enough away from any colonies on Earth that the station can be considered a remote outpost of humanity. We are on our own, and when pirates come, and believe me, the man looked seriously into the camera, they come, we must be able to independently protect ourselves and the surrounding transport routes. Is it really that scary? Cynthia raised her eyebrows in surprise. I heard that in some systems, especially those far from large colonies and routes, there are sometimes lovers of easy money, but
Now, of course, it has become somewhat easier. The captain nodded after a short thought. Over the last few months, through joint efforts, we have managed to noticeably thin out the pirate gangs operating on the surrounding transport routes. But just a year ago, everything was completely different. The question about the Calvados, asked by Cynthia, was clearly not entirely expected by Sheridan. On the other hand, the very fact that someone from the news fraternity was informed about the presence of a personal combat ship by the commander of the Babylon 5 was not something out of the ordinary. John's appointment to the post of captain was not secret. This order from the command went through all the necessary authorities, was noted in all the necessary databases. Now, if Torkeman had started listing the technical characteristics of the frigate right here, along with its combat capabilities, crew lists, and the ammunition remaining after the last sortie, yes,
Then this would have already been unauthorized access to a state secret. And the captain had every right, having reported where necessary, to lock the journalist in a solitary confinement cell closer to the airlock. And then shoot her. Or first shoot her and then lock her up.
in general, now everything was not so sad and suspicious. I understand you. Perhaps it is precisely these difficulties that are connected. The woman moved her fingers, choosing the words. Noticeable turnover among the station's top command staff. Could it be that the problem lies in the wrong selection of personnel? Or, as Senator Idoshi said, Cynthia checked her tablet, the horse is too big to ride. You're looking at the question a little wrong, Cynthia. Sheridan shook his head. Changing duty stations is an integral part of the life of any military man, especially an officer. We all know perfectly well that anyone can get an order in the evening, and in the morning find themselves in a hole that half an hour ago they had not even heard of. Before Babylon 5, I changed so many duty stations that, the man grinned, I could not remember them all. But you are right. Sometimes a horse can be too big. Such are the realities of our life. Well, we can only hope that in your case the rider has finally found his steed. Cynthia Torkeman smiled. True, Lately, many have been worried about the very future of the Babylon 5 station. What do you mean? At the last hearings in Parliament, Torkeman shrugged, the question was raised of how much money from the budget would be spent on maintaining the station in working order. Still, although it was an important project started by President Santiago, recently, due to the strife between the alien races, its future looks rather unclear.
I can't speak for the senators, John began cautiously.
But it still seems to me that the station does more good than harm. Yes, over the last 6 months, some funding has been cut. The captain nodded. But allow me. Babylon 5 was created immediately after the war with Minbar, a war that so impressed the galactic community and Earth in particular, that the idea of creating a diplomatic station seemed extremely appropriate.
In truth, the man shrugged. I still think that Babylon is in its place and does what it was created for. Without it, many issues would simply be impossible to resolve. And I'm not even mentioning trade relations. It's amazing, Cynthia chuckled. But you repeated almost word for word the words of Senator Ronald Contrell. What can I say? Sheridan laughed, spreading his arms. It means that for now, I can handle the horse. What do you make of the senator's opinion that, and I quote, Torkeman consulted her tablet as she read Contrell's statement. Our military is not what it was 14 years ago. If war with Minbar were to break out today, the outcome would be very different. With all due respect to the senator, Sheridan sighed. I don't really like discussing someone's statements behind their back. But still,
as a direct participant in that war, a participant in the battles, I must say that we are still far behind Minbar in terms of technology. Although it has decreased, as far as I know, it still remains to a sufficient degree. I will say this. The man straightened up in his chair, looking into the camera with an extremely serious expression on his face. The opinion that we are now capable of repelling an attack by Minbar, Centauri, or, God forbid, Vorlon, is simply self-deception, and a very dangerous self-deception. I hear bitterness in your words. No, Miss Torkeman. The captain shook his head with a deep sigh. Not quite like that. It's just, I know too well the price of this jingoism and, the man grimaced, armchair experts. Everyone is now sure that under his leadership we would never have lost the war, that he is a great strategist, unlike the others. But we didn't lose the war, the presenter noted with a smile. Minbar capitulated.
що зжова дімімоса хльоша, джемплегіся бує ріспука і дісять пона, що ті сцамані. Ні, так завох лиш та раз є бізназія. Ох техня pasiadíus w Babylon fiati slaby, pomini pokaju importanti familia, zasztaje mi pomono sam szternia na gnaszczeniu. Sztanie miela, reddziel, kotom poszadleniemi, ja mazma w doble tima, ktoś jej sochsa cennego w konifonu, za jej centauria i snarnys, kotom zmarnej satannej byro, zachesz bonarna. Reddziels, pirko matona rachowonia wsia mamnie samoch problem i obinożne i stak na mia akszonie. Ja tej speresen spożewkazowan za momejana, a bujam centauri republikona, zaisze ubrazoniem na żedolny marginaż morzenie salzjakami sane sermitali. Na zrasie bolongaż pił, że wskazowano jest transporte, a rein neutral teritoria razniwkana, nie tylino w treszek. I even find it difficult to assess this event, although, as for me, Jakar, if he had his way, should have found the culprit of this action and thrown him out the airlock without a spacesuit. Such a big pig the Narn pilot played on his people.
I couldn't even resist going into the station's CCTV system to check for any colorful moments of Jakar tearing off his kinsman's head in anger, but either all of this was happening behind closed doors in the embassy cabin, not covered by cameras, or the ambassador was much more reserved than I thought. Although from his face, it was easy to read the full range of epithets with which he would very much like to describe the situation, but the professional part of him prevailed over his emotions, and the Narns simply called an emergency meeting of the Babylon 5 Advisory Council. I am sure beating Londo on this issue by a few minutes.
Gentlemen ambassadors, Sheridan sighed wearily, taking his place at the presidium table. Before we begin, I ask you to refrain, if possible, from making overly harsh statements towards each other.
I understand perfectly well the complexity of the situation, but Captain Sheridan, Jacquard threw up his hands indignantly. How can you avoid making harsh statements if the Centaurians so brazenly literally spit on any decency and rules of good manners? We? Snorted Londo. Let me point out that it wasn't the Centauri who opened fire on the Narn transport first, not the Centauri at all. Enough, please. Let's have you speak, one by one. Delenn turned to the Narn. Ambassador Jacquard, it will not be better or easier for anyone if the meeting turns into a fight. Ambassador Mollari. The woman looked at Londo. Okay. Mollari shook his head irritably. Ambassador Jacquard called the council. He should speak first. Thank you, Ambassador. Sheridan nodded with relief.
Ambassador,
Yes?
the Narn rose from his seat, coming forward. Everyone present is undoubtedly aware of the collision between the Narn and Centauri ships at the station. In the intervening time, I have managed not only to consult with my government, but also to question the pilot of the Narn vessel in order to obtain a more complete picture of what happened. I am authorized to make the following statement. The Centauri ship attacked by our vessel was not a simple transport. According to the information available, it was secretly transporting weapons of mass destruction to enemy ships at the front lines, using Babylon 5 as a staging point. And if before this meeting I did not have direct evidence of this, now I do. With each word, Jacquard became more heated, raising the volume of his voice and the notes of indignation and expression in his words. An examination of the wreckage of the downed transport showed that it was transporting nuclear weapons, mass driver elements, and parts for ion cannons. The most amazing thing is that, despite all his hostility towards his colleague and his appearance, Ambassador Jacquard did not lie a single word. The technical services of Babylon 5 really did conduct a thorough examination of the wreckage, collecting everything that was left of the Centauri ship, and there really were elements found there that matched the design features of Centauri weapons, including particles of radioactive substances used by this species in nuclear weapons. It is not surprising that the council chamber literally exploded at Jacquard's statement. Tishina! Sheridan, standing up, shouted this at the top of his voice, accompanying each syllable with a blow of his hammer on the stand, on the table. We ourselves conducted an examination of the wreckage, and I can state with full responsibility that everything said by the Narn ambassador actually took place. In this regard, the captain, frowning, turned to the silently sitting Londo. We sent an official note of protest to the Centauri government. Babylon 5 is a neutral station. Moreover, Earth does not take part in the military actions between Centauri and Narn in any way. The station cannot be used as a transport route for the transportation of any types of weapons by either side of the conflict. If I may be allowed to notice, Londo began. No, Ambassador. Joan cut the Centauri off. This is an example of irresponsible behavior that endangers all the inhabitants of the station. The loading of weapons took place outside the station. Everything was under our control and did not pose a threat. The risk was minimal. Yes, thank you, the captain grimaced sarcastically. We've already encountered your minimal risk, Ambassador. The risk caused by their attack. The Centauri jumped up, pointing a finger at the Narn. On our ship and not the other way around. We have the right to transport any cargo we deem necessary. These are our sovereign rights. Sovereign rights are invalidated when they threaten other species. Delenn, enraged by what was happening, literally spat her words in the face of Londo, who was sitting next to her. There would be no threat if... Enough! The Narn slammed the table. This is just demagoguery again. There are 7 Centauri ships outside, 7 ships filled with weapons of mass destruction. My government demands that these ships be inspected and arrested if reasonable suspicions about their contents are confirmed. This is outrageous. We will never allow. This is the Babylon 5 sector, and it is up to us to decide we have exactly the same sovereign rights. Our ships will defend themselves by any means necessary. Maleri jumped up from his seat. And it doesn't matter who or why tries to detain them. Perhaps, Delenn attempted to tone down the scandal. Perhaps if the ships return to Centauri territory... No, the Narn are categorically against it. We can't let them leave, because then the weapons will still get to the front and fall on the Narn. Gentlemen, one simple word can sometimes change the most difficult situation dramatically. The only question is who will say it. In my case, as soon as I stood up from my seat, literally everyone in the council hall fell silent. And I'm not kidding, it became possible to hear the quiet hum of the ceiling lights, well, at least with my replicator hearing. Yes. Lord Baal? Sheridan looked at me with some tension in his voice. Did you want to say something to the council? Yes, Captain Sheridan, I nod, casting a serious glance at the silent ambassadors.
As I said earlier, at the last council meeting, the Goa'uld Empire is extremely disapproving of the involvement of civilians in military actions. It was for this purpose that our observation probes were placed in the territory of the Narn regime. And we are extremely grateful to you for this, Lord Baal, sighed Jakar, who had begun to calm down, bowing low. But what does this have to do with the agenda? Mollari asked indignantly, although much quieter than before. Directly, Ambassador Mollari. I think Captain Sheridan will correct me if I'm wrong. The man nodded in surprise at my words. But Babylon 5 is a diplomatic facility, and although it is controlled by naval officers, legally, and in fact, cannot be considered a military station, it's a bit more complicated in terms of international law, John thought. But in general, it's true. Thank you. I nod, continuing the thought.
And since Earth is not taking part in the conflict between Narn and Centauri, using the station as a transit point for the transportation of weapons, ammunition, and personnel of either side is unacceptable, especially in the case when this process could pose a threat to the civilian population of Babilo.
The next moment, the lights in the hall went out, plunging the room into darkness for 2 long seconds, and the station itself shook noticeably. Well, of course, Jakar and Londo's compatriots, of course, could have led their representatives quietly and calmly resolve the situation, without escalating the conflict even more, without drawing outsiders into it. Yeah, twice, and with whistling and dancing. What the hell, Captain? Commander Ivanova's face appeared on one of the displays, in sync with the captain's cry. You are urgently needed on the bridge.
There is a battle going on, near the Babylon.
Throwing an irritated glance at Londo and Jakar, the captain ran out of the council chamber, and I just shook my head in disappointment, turning to them. Is this your minimal risk, Ambassador Mollari? I raise an eyebrow skeptically. I don't understand what you... Instead of an answer, the station shook again, and the lights in the hall went out completely, leaving only emergency lighting, which allowed them to avoid tripping over their neighbors and hitting their heads on the walls when moving. The security personnel on duty in the corridor outside began to lead the ambassadors out in small groups, helping them get to more secure rooms, designed to be something like planetary bomb shelters. Chaos. Interlude. Captain Sheridan ran through the corridors of the station, feeling how somewhere inside he was growing more and more irritated and angry at the disorder going on around him. In the short time it took the station commander to run from the council chamber to the bridge, the Babylon shook 5 times. 5. These degenerates, who decided to have a shootout near a civilian station, did not think at all about the fact that just a second their own compatriots were on it, and moreover, official representatives in the form of ambassadors. And this was the only reason why he did not drag Londo and Jakar along by the scruff of the neck. The ambassadors were both in the same boat. Damage report! The captain ran onto the bridge, catching his breath, immediately staring at the display of the central terminal. Damage at levels 90 and 91, Ivanova began listing. The pressure drop in the passages is holding up for now, but there is definitely a hole somewhere. Send repairmen there! Sheridan turned to one of the bridge controllers. Agreed, I'm sending a team. The girl nodded. Have you tried to contact them?
No result. Ivanova shook her head. They're exchanging fire with each other and keeping the station in the sights. Degenerates, the man exhaled irritably. Captain, fighter pilots request permission to open fire. I give. Captain, Ivanova snapped at the commander. The ambassadors of Londo and Jakar managed to report that such an act would be considered a declaration of war. Are they completely out of their minds? Give me a direct line to both Captain! The dispatcher's voice clearly conveyed an almost superstitious fear. Opening of the transition zone. This. I apologize for interfering, Captain. The calm and ingratiating voice of Lord Baal made John freeze, feeling his hair literally stand on end in different places. Lord Baal. Through the observation window, the Captain Ivanova and the ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire who had just entered the bridge with an unperturbed look and was standing there as if he had come home, watched as a large transition zone actually opened up not far from the station, from which the golden pyramid of the ambassador's yacht, already familiar to everyone present, smoothly and majestically floated out, comparable in size to the entire Babylon 5. And the next moment, without any delays or warnings, a line of bluish sparks, brightly shining and shimmering in the darkness, cut through space, each of which found its target, and all the ships involved in the collision at that very second seemed to run into an invisible wall, stopping firing and sharply slowing down the attack of Baal's attack, completely turning off all and any electronics of the Narn and Centauri, almost completely ridding them of the inertia of movement. As I began to say at the council, before I was so barbarically killed, the Goa'uld side, our empire considers the involvement of civilians in military actions unacceptable. Warriors must fight. With this, Sheridan swallowed, watching a Centauri fighter fly past the observation window, in the cockpit of which, even at this distance, one could see the pilot, tugging at the ship's controls in a panicky hysteria. It's hard to argue with that statement. I apologize for such abrupt actions, committed without your consent. Baal bowed politely to the captain. But I'm afraid that if I hadn't done so, my attaché might have perceived the behavior of our mutual acquaintances as a threat to me, the station as a whole, and, most dangerously, her favorite cafe with cakes. Pea cakes? Ivanova asked, remembering the last time Korone defended her cakes from an outside threat. Youth, Lord Baal shrugged, as if apologizing. Youth is prone to impulsive behavior. Lord Baal, Sheridan called out to the Goa'uld cautiously. Yes, Captain. If you don't mind, when we've finished cleaning up this, he nodded toward the window. Mess, I'd be happy to discuss your policy on non-participation of civilians in hostilities with you in a little more detail. No problem, Captain. Baal nodded with a smile. Come for tea, anytime. Chapter 45. In the Shadow of Meaning. Parle, parlaling tiul, parle Porsche, not por, parla. A mentor? Yes, envoy, negotiations. Pirates of the Caribbean, the curse of the Black Pearl. Good afternoon, Lord Baal. Thank you very much for agreeing to receive me, especially after all this commotion at the station. No need, Miss Torkeman. I smile, gesturing for the reporter and her cameraman to follow me into the cabin. If I were to use all this fuss as an excuse, I could just lock myself in the cabin and never go out. Something always happens on Babylon 5. Yes, perhaps you're right. Perhaps some tea, for you, your operator. If it's convenient, we won't refuse. The woman nodded, slightly puzzled, exchanging glances with her companion. If it weren't convenient, I wouldn't have offered. I grinned and walked to the kitchen corner, starting to jingle the dishes. Finally, having brewed a large pot of tea, I returned with it to the now traditional guest table in the corner. Having carefully poured the drink into 3 cups and handed one of them to the operator and the second to Cynthia, I smoothly sank into one of the chairs, inviting Torkeman to follow my example and sit opposite. Thank you, Lord Baal, the woman nodded, taking her first sip. If you don't mind, can we begin the interview? Of course, I nod. Excellent. Steve, nodding to the operator, Cynthia put the cup back on the saucer and looked at me with a smile. When I flew to Babylon 5, I of course had a list of questions and some kind of plan for the broadcast. But yesterday's events made some adjustments to this. Therefore, I think, first of all, our viewers will be interested in the latest news. Tell me, Lord Baal, what do you think about everything that is happening? About everything? I tilted my head slightly to the side. Oh, the woman laughed. I meant yesterday's battle near the station and the Narn Centauri war in general. In any order that suits you. Interesting question. I nod. If we talk about yesterday's clash, I would say that although I was somewhat disappointed by what happened, it did not come as a surprise to me. The Narns and the Centauri, I shrug thoughtfully, have too much experience of mutual hatred and aggression in the past to miss such an opportunity to fight. Were you disappointed? Exactly. I am disappointed, Miss Torkeman. The Goa'uld Empire has many thousands of years of history. I would lie if I said that everything went smoothly for us, that we did not wage wars. This is simply physically impossible at a certain level of civilization development, especially if this civilization is thinking about expanding its borders or incorporating neighboring civilizations into its ranks.
But you must understand, I sigh demonstratively. For many centuries now, from our point of view, the use of civilians or civilian infrastructure in military operations has been unacceptable. That is why I was extremely disappointed by the decision of the Narns, and then the Centauri, to start a battle in the immediate vicinity of Babylon 5.
I find it difficult to give an exact legal assessment of the status of Babylon 5, but
Cynthia Torkeman frowned. Captain Sheridan, Commander Ivanova, and some other members of the station's crew are definitely military personnel. This somewhat complicates the legal assessment. I nod, taking a sip of tea. But still, at least according to official statements and documents, Babylon is a diplomatic station located in the neutral area of space. We can argue and engage in casuistry for a long time, but the status of a demilitarized neutral zone still exists. So, did I understand your words correctly, Lord Baal? You consider it absolutely wrong to use the space of Babylon 5 for any processes related to conducting military operations? That's right. I nod slowly. Even omitting all the ethical aspects, this is simply a direct threat to the inhabitants of the station.
as you could probably hear from the statements of Ambassador Jakar, the reason for the attack of the Narn ship on the Centauri transporter was the presence on board of ammunition for weapons of mass destruction and components of other weapons, planned for use against the Narn in the war.
Yes, I throw up my hands. Thermonuclear bombs usually do not explode on their own, from a simple shot or an explosion nearby. But a battle in the immediate vicinity of the station poses a threat not only by this factor. Sounds reasonable. What can you say about the Earth Commonwealth ships that used the station as a staging post some time ago? Military ships, mind you. Cynthia raised her eyebrows.
From my point of view, this is also not the most correct action on the part of your military leadership. But there's an important difference. Firstly, the station still belongs to the Earth Commonwealth. And secondly, as far as I know, the Earth is not currently in a state of war with any of the states. Okay, let's get back to the original question. You've spoken about the clash at Babylon 5, but can you tell our viewers anything about the war between the Centauri and the Narns? I'm sure with your civilization's experience you'll have a few words. War. War never changes, Miss Torkeman. I smile, shaking my head. At all times, all civilizations known to me have waged wars, whether for resources, territories, or say, for ideological or religious reasons. But in any case, war, no matter how righteous, necessary or forced it may be, always brings far more problems than benefits. I do not consider myself in a position to judge, but I know for sure that no matter how their conflict ends, both sides will lose far more than they gain.
Unfortunately, Cynthia sighed, not everyone shares your opinion. Unfortunately, I shrug. Are you and your viewers interested in something else? Perhaps yes, Cynthia smiled slightly embarrassedly. Everyone who has seen you even briefly is interested in why you, a representative of such a distant civilization, who came, it's scary to think, from another galaxy, look so much like an ordinary person. You don't believe in the universe's joke, I smile in response. And still, as I have said on this topic many times, I pour tea for myself and the guests. Given the antiquity of my species, the question of who resembles whom should be considered somewhat differently. That is, these people look like you, but Cynthia looked at the operator puzzled.
Even if that is true, the question how is this possible still remains open. On your Earth, I say with a slight smile, there are many different religions. Despite all the differences, they postulate one basic fact. Man was created by God, and some of them even say that he was created in the image and likeness of God.
You mean to say that? Cynthia literally almost dropped the tablet, staring at me in shock. I wouldn't want to cause religious wars. I put my palms in front of me, still smiling, but I know for a fact that my kind have visited this galaxy in the past. And your planet in particular. You may have even heard of some of them. Here, about who, for example? Let me think. I stroke my beard with my fingers in feigned thoughtfulness. I suppose the names Ra, Apophis, Anubis might mean something to you. Or Isis, Kronos. Nothing familiar? Some of them, however, were declared missing. I sigh. So I can't say that they all arrived here safely.
Cynthia finally exhaled after a long pause.
That's very ambiguous information, Lord Baal. You mean that representatives of... Torkeman swallowed. Your kind came to Earth in the distant past as... ancient gods? And that they created humanity? Miss Torkeman,
I sip my tea with a smile. The concept of God is complex enough in itself. What can we say about such ambiguous situations of meeting representatives of two species, located at immeasurably distant levels of technological and cultural development? Agree. I wave my hand around the cabin. If an ancient man had seen all this, wouldn't he have considered what he saw to be magic, and you and I to be powerful gods? Behemoth, stop it. Excuse me? The woman blinked in surprise. Behemoth? Who are you talking to? To my pet. I look eloquently at Cynthia's knees with a hint.
The woman slowly lowered her eyes and barely kept from screaming. Only now, after almost half an hour of the interview, did she notice that a large, incredibly fluffy black cat was lounging leisurely on her lap, which she had been stroking and scratching behind the ears the whole time. She stroked and scratched it, completely unaware of it, and, moreover, not even noticing the very fact of its existence.
Lord Baal, what? Who is this?
This is Behemoth, I smile. He is a G-Rinx. On your planet, his relatives are usually called cats. And I sigh, leaning over the table and carefully moving the rather squinting-tailed telepath onto my lap. Cats never change either. It's not that he has subjugated your mind, but sometimes the desire of these creatures to be stroked, scratched, fed, and have their litter box cleaned is impossible to resist. I don't quite understand what the essence of your mockery of people is, Behemoth transmitted through the replicator network, stretching leisurely. Cynthia Torkeman and her cameraman had hurriedly, finished their interview and left my cabin almost an hour ago, but the G-Rinx continued to use my lap as a pillow, lazily wagging the tip of one of its tails and squinting at my touch. Even though it couldn't, for technical reasons, subjugate my consciousness and force itself to stroke and scratch, my hands still ran through the black fur with completely automatic movements. Whatever you say, but cats are good, and these furry bastards are well aware of their capabilities. Is this what a telepathic cat is telling me? Having just used mind control to force an innocent human TV presenter to pet herself for a good half hour without even realizing it? I'll ask the deputy to note, mister, that you yourself created me this way. Yes, I don't deny it.
Interlude. Ambassador Melari had been recalled home for military consultations, as the message had said an hour ago, but Vir suspected that it would have been more accurate to frame the reason as an attempt to decide how to continue the war under the current circumstances. Lord Baal's announcement of the deployment of observation stations at each of the Narn colonies had caused quite a stir at home, forcing even the most militaristic dignitaries to sit up and think about how unambiguous the hint seemed from a representative of a highly developed empire, or so they took it. In any case, Koto was left alone on Babylon 5.
On the one hand, it was a rare time of calm and idleness. Somehow, it just so happened that 99% of any cases and problems in his area of responsibility arose precisely when Ambassador Molari was at his workplace. However, to be fair, it should be noted that he was not always the direct culprit. On the other hand, the remaining percentage was more than enough to leave Vir in a state of background anxiety and readiness for unexpected difficulties. The signal of an incoming message on the embassy terminal made Vir roll his eyes and rise from the comfortable sofa with a heavy sigh. It seemed that today that same 1% happened again. For a few seconds, the Centauri read the lines of the email, and then an irritated exhalation cut through the cabin. Morden. Again that scoundrel Mr. Morden, the man whose communication led Londo Molari not only to all his current successes, but also to all the accompanying problems.
Vir Koto had tried many times to appeal to his superior's common sense, to persuade him to cut off all communication with Morden, but to no avail. Though by the gods, Vir had not given up trying, nor would he give up. In any case, the message from Mr. Morden said that he insisted on an immediate meeting with the ambassador and would meet him in one of the Zocalo cafes every day from 1600 to 1800 station time for the rest of the week. Thoughtfully drumming his fingers on the tabletop, the ambassador's attaché looked at his watch. Ambassador Mollari would be gone much longer. If he flew home, he rarely limited himself to the main purpose of the visit, while also attending to personal matters, which meant Veer sighed. So he would have to go to the meeting. No matter how he felt about Morden, no matter how hard he tried to convince Londo to stop all forms of communication with him, he had duties.
And these duties told him that while the Centauri Republic ambassador was absent from Babylon 5, all current unfinished business should be resolved by his Virkotul's hands, of course, if that was possible in principle. I wonder if I take the ambassador's blaster and, completely by accident, of course, the Centauri sighed, shoot Morden, will Mr. Garibaldi be very angry with me? Probably very. Still, it will be a diplomatic scandal. Allowing himself a few more seconds to dream about the impossible, Veer nevertheless twitched his cheek, sending Mr. Morden a confirmation that the meeting was ready, and with a familiar movement brushed off his clothes, stood up from his chair, turning off the terminal. The way from the embassy sector to the Zocalo was much shorter than he would have liked, but still, no matter how he stretched it out, there was nothing he could do about it. All he could do was console himself with the thought that the sooner he finished this unpleasant matter, the sooner he would be able to return to rest. Mr. Morden. As the letter said, the man was found at one of the tables in a small eatery in the Zocalo. With his usual and terribly annoying smile, he sat and sipped mediocre coffee from a small cup, looking around relaxedly. Veer? The man smiled broadly, raising his eyebrows in surprise. I was expecting Ambassador Mollari. Unfortunately for you, he was called to Centauri Prime for military consultations. Oh yes, the man smiled. You are fighting the Narns. And how are things going? Why ask a question you already know the answer to? Veer shrugged. To maintain small talk, Mr. Cotto. Morden smiled just as demonstratively politely. Sit down. Having measured the metal chair and the man with a skeptical look, the ambassador's attaché nevertheless carefully sat down on the very edge, demonstrating with his whole appearance how unpleasant, almost disgusted, it was for him to be in this place next to this particular interlocutor. I'm listening to you. You don't like me. Morden shook his head with an extremely satisfied expression. An unexpected turn of events. What did I do to deserve such treatment, Mr. Cotto? After all that my employers and I have done to ensure that you and your people finally advance toward a worthy place in the galaxy, I thought we had the right to expect at least a modicum of gratitude. Why do you need Ambassador Mollari? While he is not at the station, I am forced to speak on his behalf. If you are not interested in the revival of the glory of ancient Centaur, the man chuckled, staring at his interlocutor with an extremely attentive and intent gaze. Then, what do you want, Mr. Cotto? What do I want? The Centauri winced. I want to live to see the day, Veer began with a dreamy smile, when the Centauri chop off your head as a warning to their descendants, so that they will know what they have to pay so dearly for. I would look into your dead eyes and wave goodbye, like this. Cotto, with a genuinely happy smile, made a bye-bye gesture with his fingers in the direction of Morden. Do you think, Mr. Morden, that you can arrange that? The smile on the Shadow Messenger's face faded as quickly as it had appeared. Mr. Morden gave Veer a dark look, even setting his cup aside. Clearly holding back from rude words or actions, the man slowly reached into the lapel of his jacket, using 2 fingers to pull a standard data crystal from an inside pocket. Here is information important to Ambassador Mollari. The man placed the crystal on the table, pushing it towards Veer. Please be so kind as to hand this crystal to him when he returns to the station. What's here? Veer was in no hurry to take the crystal. Important information, Morden repeated emphatically, both for Ambassador Mollari himself and for your entire endeavor. The man raised an eyebrow. As a whole. Is that all? The Centaurian carefully, as if it were a bomb, took the crystal with 2 fingers, demonstratively putting it in his pocket. That's all, Mr. Cotto. The Shadow Messenger nodded magnanimously. I won't keep you any longer. You can go. Veer stood up from his chair, twitching his cheek in irritation, once again measuring his interlocutor with an extremely hostile look, and with a short jerk of his chin, only outlined in a bow, turned on his heels, purposefully leaving the establishment and the Zocalo. Only one thought was spinning in the attaché's head.
Maybe he should just throw the crystal into the incinerator and tell Londo, well, not tell him anything.
But still, obligation and responsibility took over and the crystal remained in its place, in the pocket of his waistcoat.
No, Morden muttered quietly under his breath, watching Vir with the dark gaze. It doesn't make sense. From the outside, it might have seemed that he was simply talking to himself, pondering some personal matters, and only a particularly attentive look would have noticed that before each of his remarks, the man seemed to be listening to sounds inaccessible to anyone else, as if he were having a strange conversation with someone invisible. Finishing his coffee, Morden rose smoothly from his chair, walking slowly towards one of the public terminals on this level of the station. He had another important and certainly more difficult meeting to attend today. Reaching the terminal and inserting his identification card, the man quickly typed in a sequence of commands, sending another request for a personal meeting with one of the ambassadors.
Although he had managed to complete his business with Ambassador Malari's attaché so quickly, he still did not have unlimited free time, and some matters needed to be resolved as quickly as possible. It remained to be hoped that Lord Baal, the ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire, would be available and agree to receive him for a short but important conversation.
Captain? Yes, Michael, come in. Sheridan nodded to the head of security, continuing to do what he was doing, strangely thoughtfully, sorting through the personal belongings of his wife, who had died several years ago, trying to decide what was worth keeping and what needed to be removed from his life. Was there? The consequences of the shootout are not as dire as we thought, Garibaldi shrugged. After the first attack, of course, there are wounded and dead, mostly from the Centauri ship, but thanks to Lord Baal… yeah, John chuckled. Yeah.
So thanks to Lord Baal's intervention, we managed to avoid the most problematic part of the party. There were only 3 pilots with minor burns and a couple of broken arms.
Michael spread his hands. We didn't have time to separate them when they put the rowdies on the Babylon. At least this way, Sheridan sighed. What about the damage to the station? Besides those already received before the pyramid's arrival? Yes, it seems like nothing critical. It's better to check with the technicians, but as far as I know, the station's functionality is not currently in any danger. Good. Then all the wounded to the infirmary? The rowdy ones to the cells? Well, it's not for me to teach you these things. Well, already. The head of security chuckled. What to do with the ambassadors? Londo and Jakar? They are the very ones. Don't bother your head. The captain waved it off. Molari, as far as I know, flew off to Centauri Prime, and Jakar…
In any case, if they get upset, send them to me. Your job is the safety of all the inhabitants of the station. Diplomatic hassles are my headache.
Got it, Michael nodded. Looking up at the monitor on the wall, where excerpts from personal files of some people were spinning in a circle and reading the flashing lines of text. This is Icarus? Yes, Sheridan nodded, turning to the screen. The research ship where my wife died. I'm going through her personal belongings, well, you know, trying to figure out what to throw out and what to keep. And then a crystal with data surfaced. Before the departure, she sent a full summary of the expedition. I read about this tragedy. Garibaldi nodded sympathetically. I am truly sorry. Can I see it? Yes, of course, the man nodded. There is no personal data here. Michael began to look through the crew's cards one by one, as was his long-standing habit, reading each line and studying each photo for a few seconds.
On one of the cards, the man frowned. He had definitely seen this person. But where? Certainly not on Earth or Mars. He had been there a long time ago and the memories were not that old. Rather the opposite. Captain, who is this? I've seen him somewhere. On Earth perhaps, or… Sheridan also glanced at the open dossier. No. Captain, I saw him just recently. Maybe even on Babylon 5, I tell you for sure. It's impossible. When the Icarus exploded, he was among the crew, just like Anna. The man shook his head. I remembered. Garibaldi snapped his fingers. Captain, I saw him at the station, and more than once. He's alive, that's for sure. For a long time I couldn't figure out where I'd seen him, but now I remember. Morden. At least 3 times in the last month his name flashed on the lists at customs, and the ID is the same. What the hell? He's dead. How could security miss this fact? Well, Captain, the head of security spread his hands in embarrassment.
We are not the central customs service on Earth.
If he had violated the order here, Michael shrugged, he would have been exposed. We always check such people in all the databases, but as it is. When did you see him last?
Let's see. Garibaldi used the captain's computer to enter the station's databases. According to the documents, he passed customs 2 days ago. A return ticket? Captain? The man turned to the chief. He's still at the station. Find him. Sheridan became darker than a thundercloud. I don't care how you do it. Even if you take the entire station apart, but bring him to me. I must know why he came. And why he is alive when everyone else is dead. Garibaldi only nodded seriously, quickly heading for the exit into the corridor. Despite all the personal reasons for the captain's order, he himself felt that something was wrong with this man.
Besides, Morden really did have the documents of a dead man, and this, at a minimum, required an inspection and clarification of how and why he flies to the station and back, as if to his home. Whatever he said, it was already a stone in the garden of the security service, and Michael loved his garden. So it was a courtesy visit after all. After the Shadow's reconnaissance in the Zok system, there was a lull on all fronts of the Centauri-Narn war. Both the Centauri themselves and their secretive patrons clearly preferred to take a short break in order to assess the new situation and work out a plan of action that would take into account the new participant in my person. And now a letter arrived from Mr. Morden with a request for a personal meeting, and I became curious. Would he try to persuade me not to interfere, or would the Shadows immediately move on to threats? Although the latter was still unlikely, based on all my knowledge of canon, and all the existing bits of information about the Shadows, it turned out that the probability of a direct confrontation at this stage was a completely insignificant 3.21%. At the moment, I simply had not yet physically managed to pinch their tail hard enough to cause an obvious aggressive reaction. It was in canon that the Shadows decided to kill Kosh after it was at his instigation that the Volon ships, and perhaps his personal ones, attacked the Shadows in one of the systems, entering into a direct confrontation. Good afternoon, Mr. Morden. I give the command to open the door to the cabin with a smile. As soon as the emissary of the Shadows came close to it,
Lord Baal.
He visibly shuddered and shot a glance towards one of his companions, whom I could see perfectly well thanks to the long-established video surveillance systems. Thank you for your willingness to meet.
Oh, what are you?
I gesture for the man to come in. I'm always glad to have guests. As usual, the man was accompanied by 2 shadow infantrymen, who were constantly in a state of phase shift, so as not to flicker on camera recordings and not to collide with the inhabitants of the station accidentally met in the corridor. After my phrase about guests, the Shadows seemed to exchange glances with each other, and then one of them froze in the corridor outside, like a motionless statue, while the second spiky figure slipped after the man into the cabin, clearly carefully studying the surroundings and me at the same time. As last time, the replicators recorded a neat stream of scanning radiation. Despite the failure, they did not give up trying to understand who or what I was. Yes. Please sit down. I point to one of the chairs with a wide gesture. Tea? Coffee? Something else? No, thank you. I would prefer to get down to the business for which I came here. If you've decided to ask me again what I want, I smile with a slight hint of mockery in my voice, sitting down opposite. Oh, Morden laughed. We've already cleared up that question, it seems to me. Although, to be honest, the topic of my visit has some relation to it. Mrrr. What? A cat? Looking incredibly surprised, the shadow emissary turned his head towards the door to the next room, from which Behemoth emerged at that very moment, lazily wagging his tails. And if Morden was simply surprised by the presence of a pet from Earth in the alien ambassador's cabin, then the shadow standing near the door reacted much more, vividly. The spider-like figure froze like a statue, turning its entire body towards the Gearings and warily moving its upper limbs. What an interesting creature. The hippopotamus glanced at the shadow with truly feline contempt, and then simply sat down in the middle of the room, wrapped both tails around his body, and began licking himself.
This is Gearings, Mr. Morden. Perhaps the Earth Cats are his distant relatives, but I assure you, he certainly did not come from your planet. Please forgive me, it was just a bit unexpected. I thought pets weren't allowed on Babylon 5. Every rule has its exceptions. So? Yes. Morden listened to the quiet and barely audible this time even for me, creaking of the shadow, and nodded. My, employers authorized me to clarify some questions that arose in the course of their activities. It so happened, Lord Baal. The man spoke slowly, very carefully weighing his words and watching my reaction, that your decision to help the colonies of the Narn people in the current conflict somewhat, I would say, affects their interests. And since my employers definitely consider themselves to be sane and reasonable, I was instructed to contact you and try to somehow resolve the situation that has arisen, to exclude mutual misunderstanding.
Are they afraid? Behemoth transmitted with surprised interest over the replicator network, continuing to stare at the frozen shadow.
It's a shadow, Behemoth. They have a very complicated relationship with telepaths. How curious. Well, I smile. I'll be happy to listen to what your employers want to tell me. Yes, Morden collected his thoughts. You see, Lord Baal. At that moment, the shadow, which continued to watch the behemoth studying it, moved, taking a step towards Morden, causing him to flinch and fall silent. Conflict gives rise to development. Interesting. The man's voice changed dramatically, becoming deeper and somehow lifeless. And the phrase about direct control suddenly popped into my memory, very appropriate for this moment. An unexpected decision on the part of an ancient race. Very unexpected. The probability of direct contact, when the shadows would want to talk themselves, even through an intermediary, was estimated by the replicators at a value much less than 0.031% to be precise. The strong survive? I tilt my head to the side, looking not at Morden anymore, but directly at the shadow, a little to the side. Exactly. Weak species always give up living space for development. It is the law of nature. I assume the question your puppet asks everyone has some meaning. This man is not a puppet. He voluntarily learned and accepted our view of existence. Question. Yes. Morden really did now look more like a ventriloquist's dummy, taken under mental control by his bodyguard. For any development, a species must first learn its desires, its purpose. Without a purpose, there is no meaning. Just as without struggle, there is no development. Is that why you chose Ambassador Mollari? I lean back in my chair, thoughtfully stroking my chin.
For his ambition.
Centaurians are a proud species, promising in terms of development. The conflict for existence will give them the opportunity to develop. And if the Narns win, that means their side will develop. The shadow moved its upper limbs, causing Morden to shrug. Why did you come to me? Interference. Helping the weak does not benefit development. If you think that conflict is the right path, I glance at the shadow. Why do you remain in the shadows? The emergence of a civilization of your level would perfectly serve as the seed for a conflict on a galactic scale. Risk. The shadow shifted from one foot to the other. Our direct participation will make the path not independent. There will be no development. Morden hesitated, and the shadow emitted a long, grinding trill. It was clearly trying to find an analog in human language, but could not choose a suitable term. It will not be pure. What do you want from me?
Leave the Narns and Centauri to their fate. You are strange in this corner of the universe. What do you care about the fates of the younger ones?
It's funny. You're saying exactly the same thing that Ambassador Kosh told me.
Kosh. Morden's voice clearly laced with hatred, and the shadow itself twitched, waving its paws. The Vonans don't understand. They don't see the truth. Do you see it? I turn my head, looking directly at the shadow with a searching gaze. You believe that development can only be achieved through struggle, but at the same time, you do not want to fight yourselves. Your opponents, the Volans, as far as I know, thirst for control, thirst to direct the development of younger races.
leading them to the heights with measured actions, but they do not tolerate control over themselves. Do you think that you have already reached the limit of development? Do you not need any of these paradigms?
Do you believe that in all the diversity of the universe there is room for only one path? Are you eager for a fight? The shadow tilted its upper body, copying my curious tilt of the head earlier. What a limited view of the world, I sigh, shaking my head in disappointment. As with your opponents, we view the universe and our place in it too differently. I do not consider conflict to be the only stimulus and means for development and evolution, as, incidentally, neither do strict control frameworks. Commitment to only one choice deprives one of freedom of choice altogether. The spider-like figure let out a clearly irritated hiss, and Morden's body twitched. My words were definitely not to his taste. Silence reigned in the cabin for some time. The shadow considered its next steps, leaving the human puppet to sway in some kind of trance. They could be understood. Before I appeared on the scene, the shadows and the Volans were the biggest frogs here. They had to take into account only each other's actions, and perhaps their grandfather Lorien, who, however, as shown in canon, preferred to simply not interfere in what was happening, until the situation got completely out of control. We heard your words, the puppet finally exhaled. They require thought. Haste is detrimental to development. The shadow moved its upper limbs smoothly, taking a couple of steps back towards the door, and Mr. Morden slumped in his chair, breathing like a fish out of water. It was obvious from his face that he had either never been used as a direct intermediary before, or had only been used very, very rarely, and the process was certainly not pleasant. Phew. Gathering his strength, the man straightened up, raising his eyes to me. I hope the conversation was productive, Lord Baal. The future will tell. Mr.
Morden, I shrug with a smile, casting a quick glance at the shadow that continued to remain silent. In any case, your employers did everything in their power to try to get their point across. I'm glad, if you'll allow me. The man finally evened out his breathing and, having straightened his suit, carefully rose to his feet. I should take a rest. This is quite a tiring process. Of course, Mr. Morden, I nod. Thank you for such an interesting and informative conversation. Likewise, Lord Baal, slightly swaying, accompanied by the intent, cat-like gaze of Behemoth, the emissary of the shadows headed towards the exit. Interlude. It hurt. Damn it, but it definitely hurt. Despite all the enhancements the shadows had made to his body, Morden was still mostly human, and the human mind was a pretty delicate structure.
In his service to the shadows, only twice before had his masters used direct mental control, usually limiting themselves to short phrases in their... Hell, he wasn't even sure that the grinding sound was their language. Either way, he felt absolutely disgusting right now. I would be very grateful to you, the man sighed, glancing sideways at the translucent silhouette of one of his companions. If you at least warned me about the moments when you were going to do this next time. Although, not hearing the slightest sound as an answer, the man sadly rolled his eyes, entering the elevator. Who am I kidding? Mr. Morden? As soon as the elevator doors opened on the next level, the shadow emissary saw 5 security personnel right in front of him, staring straight at him. How, can I be of service to you, gentlemen? Having given his face a polite expression, the man smiled, raising his eyebrows questioningly. You will come with us. Excuse me? Morden frowned in confusion. You will come with us, Mr. Morden? Repeated one of the guards. What's the matter exactly? You've clearly confused me with someone else. I insist, Mr. Morden. The security officer narrowed his eyes, and his colleagues pointed their service weapons at the man. You're kidding me. The shadow messenger exhaled irritably, raising his hands and noting the complete inaction of his companions, who, as always, when the issue did not concern his life or death, did nothing to avoid giving away their presence. Interlude. Who the fuck are you? Sheridan sat at the interrogation room table for almost 10 minutes, staring into the face of someone who couldn't possibly be there.
Mr. Morden had been found by Michael Garibaldi's subordinates. tracked down and grabbed by the white arms as he exited the elevator as he was leaving the embassy sector. It was still a good question what he was doing there, but the captain decided to deal with such questions a little later. First of all, he needed to at least understand how Morden had managed to survive the crash that had destroyed their entire ship. And why the hell had he survived while Anna, Sheridan's wife, hadn't? "This is a rather cozy room, Captain," Morden said, looking around pointedly. "But you didn't invite me here to keep quiet, did you?" "Besides," the man raised his eyebrows, "even though I don't know much about law, even I know that usually when someone is arrested, they bring charges against him."
Isn't that right?
John, continuing to silently drill Morden with his gaze, took a photograph of his wife from his jacket pocket and demonstratively placed it on the table in front of the man, right in the middle. Not a single muscle moved on the face of the shadow emissary. He pulled the card toward himself with polite interest, then took it in his hands and peered into the woman's face on the image. Very beautiful," he chuckled, turning the photograph over, reading the signature on the back. "Anna Sheridan. And what could that mean?" Captain Sheridan, just as demonstratively, also maintaining silence, pressed a couple of buttons on his communicator, starting a video file to play on one of the monitors behind Morden, prompting him to turn toward the sound. A recording from the Prime Station's technical bot appeared on the screen, accompanied by off-screen commentary. "Left the Prime Station for a planned archaeological expedition."
The last messages received from the Icarus ship did not indicate what happened to him next.
"That's what you mean," Morden nodded, turning back to Sheridan. "You're right, I was on board the Icarus. Unfortunately, I don't remember anything about what happened there." The man spread his hands. "I don't even know how or why I survived. I was picked up by a transport ship flying past. As I understand it, they found the wreckage of the Icarus, and among it, me, unconscious, floating in a protective suit. Perhaps I was working outside the ship. I was so shocked that I completely forgot what happened then. You can't imagine." Morden moved confidentially closer to the captain. "It took me several months even to remember my name." "Is that why you didn't tell the center that you were alive?" "That's why," Morden nodded. "But I reported when I came to my senses. I sent the documents and the report. I can assume," he smiled, "that they never received it?"
It turns out that you didn't receive it, Sheridan shook his head. "But you understand that you are breaking many laws in this way."
"I am surprised that only we on Babylon 5 noticed this. And I haven't even asked what business you have with certain ambassadors. In light of everything else, this raises even more questions." "I don't understand. My business negotiations do not concern the management of Babylon 5. Morden leaned back in his chair with a smile. "They certainly do not violate any laws." "Perhaps," Captain Sheridan nodded. "Although, of course, the very fact of business negotiations," John emphasized the words with quotation marks from his fingers, "of a private person with a diplomat is... But you forget one important point. You have the documents of a dead man." Sheridan pointed his finger at the freeze frame with the Icarus on the monitor. "According to all official sources, the crew of the ship Icarus, including you, perished during this expedition."
Captain, I don't know what to tell you." Morden frowned, throwing up his hands. "I didn't do anything illegal. Yes, I admit the possibility that my documents were not updated after I was declared dead. But it's not my fault." "You are a brazen liar," Sheridan sighed, with a satisfied expression on his face. "I'm truly sorry you feel that way, Captain Sheridan. But the truth is that I'm innocent." Morden sighed, becoming serious. "And since you have nothing to charge me with, you won't get out of here, Mr. Morden. You can't do this, really? Well then, bring charges against me. I know my rights." "Rights, Mr. Morden?" The captain smiled sarcastically. "What rights? You are dead, and you will remain so until my report is received on Earth." I think the station commander rose to his feet, walking around Morden and leaning towards his ear. "You understand that dead people have no rights and cannot have any. It is in your best interest to answer my questions."
"You've started a very dangerous game, Captain." Morden didn't smile anymore. His face became extremely focused and serious, and he himself, turning his head half-turned, closely watched Sheridan's movements, simultaneously thinking about the situation. "This could cost you your rank and your place. 139 people died on board the Icarus, Mr. Morden, the man said through clenched teeth, including my wife, Anna Sheridan. Every single one of them died, and you sit here, contented with your life, without a single scratch from that explosion. Doesn't this situation bother you? It bothers me very much. And I will find out, Mr. Morden, John finished gloomily, what really happened to the Icarus on that expedition. If it means keeping you in a cell, you will sit here for an hour, 2, a day, a week, even 500 years. At the end, the captain almost screamed, but you will not leave here until I hear from you the truth. Sheridan gave Mr.
Morden an almost hateful look, turned on his heel, and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving him alone. As soon as the captain had disappeared behind the door, the shadow emissary exhaled in irritation, grimaced, and slumped in his chair. This visit to the station was becoming extremely tiresome. No, Morden wasn't too worried. If things got tough, they'd drag him out, as they had dragged him out more than once. And the two shadows, who were even now standing next to him in this room, inspired a certain amount of optimism. But that didn't change the fact that the visit to Babylon 5 had become more tiresome than usual. A very gloomy Michael Garibaldi sat at his workstation and looked at the surveillance monitor. And on the monitor, his immediate superior, Captain Sheridan, had been methodically and with complete dedication burying himself and his entire career under a huge mountain of first-class fresh manure for almost 10 hours now.
The commander of Babylon 5 was interrogating the previously detained Mr. Morden. No, Garibaldi understood perfectly well, and in some ways even supported his boss's motives. After all, losing his wife in a catastrophe was enough in itself, and suddenly seeing one of that wife's colleagues, who should have been just as dead all this time. Being completely frank and honest with himself, Michael could not guarantee that in the same situation, he himself would not have behaved the same way, but he was not in such a situation, and that is why, being able to see what was happening from the outside, he could try to convey to the captain the fallacy and danger of such behavior. Ugh, stubborn bastard. Sheridan, clearly tired and irritated, entered the guard post, throwing his jacket on one of the chairs without looking and purposefully heading towards the coffee table. But nothing. The longer I interrogate him, the more inconsistencies there are in his words. Captain, all I need is to catch him in a direct lie, and then I can… Captain! I understand, Mr. Garibaldi, but I can't do otherwise. Damn it, Captain! Garibaldi almost spat, taking the captain by the shoulders and literally forcing him into the chair at the desk. Stop making a mess of my workplace! Here! What is this? John looked at Garibaldi in surprise. What? Michael chuckled. An official charge of document forgery. Illegal customs inspection. Garibaldi demonstratively laid out printed and filled out forms in front of the chief. And, to complete the happiness, an order to inspect the cabin for potential contraband. Here, sign this, please. This? Sheridan, having finally read the documents laid out before him, raised his understanding gaze to Garibaldi. Thank you, Michael. It's nothing, Chief. The head of security smiled and shrugged. If there's a person, you can always find an article. Why break protocol if it can be correctly filled out? True, there is a small discrepancy. Garibaldi scratched the tip of his nose. An official paper came from the embassy of the Centauri Republic. They state that Mr. Morden has diplomatic status. In fact, we should not have detained him at all, but simply handed him over to them for investigation and sent an official note.
Dip status? What the hell? Sheridan frowned. Who the hell is he?
Yes, if I knew… It's up to you to decide, Captain.
Michael shrugged.
I don't think the Centauri will raise a howl for one person, but you know, Londo, anything can hit him in the head.
This could… John sighed. And then what do you suggest?
I would have brought official charges against him.
Garibaldi tapped his finger on the forms laid out.
Checked his cabin, checked his documents in all the databases. Well, standard protocol. And then…
The security officer sighed.
I would have let him go to hell.
After all, the only thing we needed now to be completely happy was a diplomatic scandal with the Centauri. Let go? Michael, of course, he'll try to sneak out of the station right away. And I'm sure that next time he'll either arrive here with nothing in his documents or he'll smuggle himself in. In any case, there's nothing we can do about it now without violating a bunch of regulations. But in any case, Garibaldi put his hand to his chest. I'll keep an eye on him myself while he's on Babylon. If I have to, I'll even sit in the next toilet stall every time he needs to take a shit. If there's anything to find there, I'll find something to catch him on. But within the law, boss. There was silence in the office for a while. Sheridan slowly drank his almost cold coffee and looked at the surveillance monitor showing Morden's camera.
And he was almost torn between two contradictory feelings. On the one hand, there was common sense. Who would have thought that such a substance even existed in a person who seemed to enjoy commanding a station like Babylon 5? Which clearly hinted to the captain that Garibaldi was absolutely right in everything. And on the other hand, there was his dead wife. The thirst to learn at least something about her fate and, let's be honest, a tiny hope that if Morden had survived, then Anna could have somehow survived too. Okay, Sheridan finally sighed, collecting the forms in a pile and signing the last one for a search of Morden's cabin. I'll go and delight our guest. Take care of his quarters for now, although something tells me that it will be empty. Me too, Michael shrugged, but it never hurts to check. There are always enough self-confident fools. What are we going to do with the Centauri's request? Who specifically directed him?
Virkoto, the security officer checked the computer. As far as I know, Londo is still away, but I'm sure he's already been informed that this is unlikely to be his attaché's initiative. Yes. Okay, I'll talk to Mr. Koto myself. I understand you, Captain. We're working. Sheridan, smiling in anticipation, picked up the uniform jacket he had previously discarded and, putting it on, began to carefully and methodically bring his appearance into full compliance with the regulations. This process, as the captain had long noticed, was an excellent way to collect his thoughts and get into the working mood. In any case, in addition to Morden, he still had a conversation with Ambassador Mollari's attaché ahead of him, and although Vir was a rather peaceful fellow, he was still de jure the official representative of the Centauri on the station. "Are you back yet, Captain?" Morden asked sarcastically as soon as the captain returned to the cell. "Did you miss me?" "You have no idea how much, Mr. Morden," Sheridan replied in the same tone, placing the filled-out forms with the charges on the tabletop with a loud slap. "I have brought you some to read. Since you're staying here for a long time, you'll have just enough time to read them while your cabin is being searched." "What?" the man jerked. "What the hell, Captain?" "Very simple," John shrugged. "Forgery of identification documents, passing and, as I understand repeatedly with their help, customs procedures on Babylon 5, probable smuggling of contraband cargo in an as yet unknown volume, and that's only what concerns my station directly. Should I continue? You asked to present you with an official charge. I brought you 3. Enjoy. In the meantime." The captain leaned towards the emissary of the shadows, who was looking at him gloomily. "I will dig up all your dirty little secrets, and I will finally find out who you are and how you survived in a place where more than 100 people from the crew of the Icarus died." Having measured Morden with a long look, Sheridan nodded at the papers in front of him on the table and, with the look of a man satisfied with life, turned on his heels, heading for the exit of the cabin. "Captain," Morden threw at the officer who froze in mid-step. "I remember this." "Yeah, you won't forget," John chuckled, still standing with his back turned, and finally left. Well, perhaps Garibaldi was right. The official path can bring no less satisfaction than the direct path. But now, while Michael's subordinates will turn Morden's cabin and things upside down, another meeting awaited him, Sheridan. Another meeting awaited, and he did not expect anything particularly good from it, if Centaur really officially issued Morden the status of a diplomatic employee of their state. In fact, this makes the person immune to most airflows, and Morden will indeed have to be released and even bring an official apology. One can only hope that... "Captain Sheridan!" "Yes?" Turning around at the call, John froze in surprise in the corridor. Looking at him with concern, Ambassador Delaine was standing, and behind her, what was even more surprising, the tall figure of Ambassador Kosh loomed. "Ambassador Delaine? Ambassador Kosh? We need to talk to you about Mr. Morden, Captain." "Excuse me?" The man frowned in surprise, shifting his gaze from the Minbari to the Vorlon. "We know that your security service detained him at customs. He must be released, Captain." And you too? Is he everyone's favorite uncle? Why the hell are you all so protective of him? What the hell is going on? Ah, Ambassador Delenn?
You'll have to take our word for it, Captain. If you don't let him go, everyone will be in terrible danger.
Oh no, John exclaimed indignantly.
Certainly not in that formulation. He broke several laws, and I will not rest until I get to the bottom of it all, especially after you, the Babylon 5 commander, pointed his finger at the woman. And you, he turned to Kosh, are so concerned about him. If you insist, after a brief exchange of glances with the Vorlon ambassador, the Minbari sighed, nodding. We will tell you, but I warn you, having learned his secret, having learned what we know, you will hardly be able to sleep peacefully at night, Captain Sheridan. Let's go, Captain. Without waiting for an answer, Delenn turned and walked with a flying gait towards the elevator. Pausing for exactly a second as if appraising Sheridan with his gaze, Kosh followed her. Sighing tiredly, the captain had no choice but to follow.
Lord Baal. The captain's tired face, which appeared on the terminal screen, eloquently demonstrated how personally fed up he was with everything happening around him. I apologize for disturbing you. Captain Sheridan? I smile. To what do I owe the call? I remember you offered to come over for a cup of tea, the officer sighed. If it's convenient for you now, I wouldn't refuse. Of course, Captain. I nod, especially since I really did invite you. Then, if you don't mind, I'll be there in half an hour, the man let out another tired sigh. Okay, I'll be waiting for you. Well, everything that was happening around Morden had motivated Sheridan quite a bit, and I was more than sure that it was precisely because of his close contact with this shadowy traveling salesman that the commander of Babylon 5 was in such a shaky state of mind, so to speak.
Especially since it was after this that Delenn and Kosh were supposed to take him into their hands, enlightening him on the topic of local alignments and the struggle between good and evil in a particular galaxy, so to speak.
Well, the man will come for a cup of tea. This cup must be provided. The main thing is, Hardly had the computer terminal display gone out when a silver dot appeared right in the center of the cabin, literally in the center. The point of the phenomenon's origin was the exact geometric center of the room, flashing faintly, right in the air. The object that appeared was not registered in any of the radiation ranges available to the replicators, being determined only visually, and having, according to this same visual assessment, a diameter smaller than the diameter of a water molecule. It took me exactly 1.345 seconds to realize the situation, and the next
moment, the space around the phenomenon was covered by emergency force fields of all known species to the replicators. I'm not paranoid, but...
Do I really see this? I glanced sideways at Behemoth, who was frozen in the middle of the slime and washing himself while sitting on one of the chairs. Me too.
The phenomenon is not registered. Korone confirmed over the replicator network, adding a packet of emotions of surprise, alertness, and slight fear. Lord Baal, whatever it is, it only exists in the visible spectrum, but replicators are not subject to hallucinations, are they? The next moment, right before my eyes, the dot underwent a whole series of changes, each of which individually took exactly 1/13 of a second. The glowing dot flared even brighter. It went out completely. It turned from a dot into a spiral that quickly grew in size. It took the form of a perfect circle, and then,
with a quiet clang right through all the force fields, violating all conceivable laws of physics, a silver parallelepiped fell onto the cabin floor, which was... What is this? A player? I turned my head to Behemoth, dumbfounded. Mr. The no less surprised blinking Jirinx turned his gaze from the object to me and back, twitching the tip of his ear. Yes, it's a player. Everything except the material matches the line of music playback devices that were created and sold on Earth at the turn of the 20th, 21st centuries. Yuki commented over the network, a little hesitantly. But, Lord Baal, it's impossible. But it is, I answered with exactly the same intonation. Carefully approaching the lying artifact,
He created a levitating platform with the help of techno-magic, causing the player to smoothly rise above the floor and hang in the air. Although visually it looked like a player from the 20th century, all the results of the scanning conducted by the replicators directly stated that the substance of which its body consisted not only did not exist on Earth in the 20th century, it could not exist in principle. Property of, to the finder, owner, PS. I'm sick of losing them. It was indeed a regular music player in a metal case with a large, probably touchscreen display and an engraving probably from its original owner. But I blinked in surprise and looked towards Behemoth, who continued to sit in a strange pose. The replicators couldn't take a sample of the material the case was made of. The junior one, assembled for the sake of testing, specially sharpened for analyzing the material composition of the object being studied, taking samples and so on, couldn't even scratch the surface.
Наверное, компания десь самать хайоткою робрвака. Она это сначала замождена сама храша. Занава большете 10 последается и крайняя мерта. Она и труше.
You're right. Even at the nano level, this material was indestructible. For the first time in my entire presence in this world, I fully understood what a computer feels when it gets a blue screen of death in the middle of my cabin. Right out of thin air, without even stirring a single atom, a 20th century Earth player appeared, the body of which is absolutely, completely, simply in fact, impervious to any physical impact, and replicators can actually chew cruiser armor, if that's what it takes. And also, this player is definitely broken and has traces of someone's teeth? I definitely have to research it. If the replicators can replicate this substance, no, they simply have to replicate it.
Even if I can't pinch off a piece of it, I can always scan it with the Asgard teleportation device. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. What? A thin white beam of light, striking from the ceiling of the cabin, ran around the player, still lying on the floor, and the next moment, nothing happened. No, literally nothing. The beam of the Asgardian teleport, which at the first stage of the transfer process carried out the compilation of the atomic structure of the object, which allowed, among other things, to have the ability to further recreate it from nothing, if there was energy for the transformation of substances, was simply unable to penetrate this very structure. But that would mean that the interatomic bonds of matter, damn it, that's impossible. No, science allows the existence of compounds whose crystal lattice is composed so highly or has such a specific structure that breaking its bonds becomes practically impossible. But exactly practically. Here, interesting. If the Asgard teleporter is not even capable of scanning this substance to begin the transfer process, then a short command and the replicator blocks shifted, revealing the gate hidden in the wall of the cabin. An activation pulse, power from the Technomage module, and a wormhole linking the cabin on Babylon 5 with a laboratory complex on the opposite side of the galaxy was ready. Junior, still unsuccessfully trying to bite the indestructible player, grabbed it with his manipulators and, holding it in front of him, quickly scurried into the passage. Meow? Was all Behemoth uttered, dumbfoundedly watching as the spider calmly passed to the other side, as any material object should, undergoing a two-way transformation from material form to energy, information, and vice versa. And the player, so much for your meow. That was all I could answer, because the player simply remained lying on the cabin floor as if there was no Stargate here, and it had not been carried through it. Or rather, it passed through the event horizon just fine, as did the spider that carried it. But when the younger one was sent to the address, the player remained in the same place where it was at the moment the spider disappeared in the middle of the event horizon. Now, to hell with it. I closed the gate just to make sure that the player really is still where it was, just as indestructible and chewed up by some chthonic nyech. Having measured the artifact with a close look, I hide the Stargate behind the replicator blocks, simultaneously forming an impenetrable container around the player, also made of replicators, a simple silver cube, looking completely monolithic from the outside. Let it stand on the shelf for now, out of harm's way. But I won't leave it that easily. The signal from the front door caught me in the middle of an extremely important and necessary process of trying by all means to penetrate inside
the player that violates all laws of physics, and scan its structure. Unsuccessful attempts. Come in, Captain. Sighing and putting the cube with the artifact on one of the shelves in the corner of the cabin, I give the command to open the door. Sheridan, as promised, showed up exactly 30 minutes later, but in person he looked much more rumpled than through the video link. Judging by your appearance, you haven't had the easiest day. Judging by you, the captain sighed wearily, your day can hardly be called the height of bliss and pleasure. Am I at the wrong time? Nothing that I couldn't put off until later, I wave it off. As they say on Earth, don't put off until tomorrow what you can put off until the day after tomorrow. An excellent expression in my opinion, although a bit, lazy? The man smiled slightly.
Of course, however, if you don't abuse it, such an approach makes you think about your affairs and plans to some extent, singling out the truly important things. But I suppose you came to me on a slightly different issue. Tea? With a hospitable gesture, I invite the man to take any of the seats in the cabin, myself moving to the kitchen corner and starting the important process of brewing tea. To tell the truth now, I'm not entirely sure why exactly I came. Well, Sheridan sighed once again and shrugged. Besides the delicious free tea, God knows where you get it, but there are already legends about it around the station. Really? In any case, it's a great secret even for me. Korone is getting it somewhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that she got in touch with some criminal organization of the mafia type and, using completely illegal and absolutely immoral methods, knocked out wholesale supplies of elite raw materials from one of your colonies.
I hope you're not serious now, Lord Baal. Me too. After a dramatic pause, I smiled broadly at the tense officer. If she had done that, I would have known for sure. Yes, in any case, I put a tray with a teapot and cups on the table in front of the man and pour tea into them. This does not change the quality of the drink, and therefore I suggest you forget about the bureaucracy for a while and just enjoy it. The captain nodded thoughtfully, putting one of the cups toward himself. It's funny, but I really have no idea where Korone and Yuki got this tea from. I mean, it's obvious that they most likely ordered it through one of the favorite cafes in the station's entertainment area, but how a truly elite variety ended up on Babylon 5, that was strange even for me. Of course, unless you ask yourself the question seriously and follow the entire supply chain through the station's systems, customs service and transport routes, but that would be
unsportsmanlike. Yes. Perhaps this will be useful. Although, of course, if you don't mind, I would like to discuss a couple of issues at the same time, so to speak. Of course, Captain. What are you interested in?
Captain Sheridan, I spread my hands, even omitting the fact that you just answered my question with your own exclamation.
I smile. We live in a rather cramped corner of the galaxy. At a certain level of technological development, concealing such significant facts is quite problematic. The captain put his cup down on the table with a heavy sigh. After talking with Ambassador Delenn and Kosh, I wouldn't be surprised by anything anymore, but it's not very pleasant to live and understand that everyone around you knows more and gets the news before you do. I can understand you. I nod. Let's just agree on the fact that I look the man straight in the eye with a sigh. The philosophy of our secretive, dark, new acquaintances is of no interest to me or the Goa'uld Empire. Thank you. John exhaled with some relief.
It's somewhat reassuring, although, to be honest, the latest events and the facts I've received make me look at what's happening around me a little differently. This happens sometimes. The main thing is not to take rash steps. It seems I was extremely close to it. With Morden? With Morden. Tell me, Lord Baal. The captain took the cup in his hands again. If you were in my place, would you be able to let him go? I can't know why Mr. Morden is so important to you personally, Captain. I answer slowly, slightly disingenuously. But every decision has a price, and consequences, often not in a single instance. In personal matters, it is very difficult to remain unbiased and logical. But I would at least try to weigh the consequences and understand the price of any of the decisions made. Delenn is the same way, the man sighed. And when you have irrefutable evidence before your eyes, as far as I have learned about the non-obvious laws of the universe, Captain, I smile encouragingly at Sheridan, it usually gives more than one opportunity. The issue is Mr. Morden is not yet completely closed. Okay, the Babylon commander finished his tea and reached for the kettle to pour more. In any case, I've already made a decision, and I can only hope that it was the right one.
Somehow I didn't feel like discussing topics of galactic importance. Let's talk about something else. As you say, Captain, a smile. Do you have any specific topic of conversation that interests you? To tell the truth, there is, the man chuckled. I recently saw an excerpt from an interview with Cynthia Torkeman. Well, you remember she flew to Babylon literally yesterday. Did your relatives really fly to Earth in ancient times? Oh. Chapter 47. Prophetic Paradoxes. If time travel is possible, where are the tourists from the future?
Stephen Hawking.
Interlude. Lady Morella, the third wife of the late Emperor of the Centauri Republic, opened her eyes with a soft groan, returning to consciousness, a visionary trance. Few Centauri without the gift could even imagine what this process actually felt like. Few knew what it was like to have visions fill your head, and you can do nothing about it, just watch and remember. That was how it was this time. The woman sighed, straightening in her chair and pulling her wine glass towards her. Never before had her predictions been so long, so complicated, so confusing. So complicated that she could barely understand anything. She saw the Emperor, not the new one, Cartagia. No, she saw her husband, Emperor Turhan, young, just like he had been when they first met. Saw him happy, smiling, just like he had once been in his youth, before the burden of the imperial throne had changed him, forcing him to become more serious and gloomy.
A young man sat in a chair in deep thought in some house, an ordinary house, typical of any noble Centaurian, and read a book. His forehead wrinkled periodically, and he frowned, obviously trying to understand something from what he read. Turan, if it was him, of course, raised his head, looking as if straight into the eyes of the woman, and she, with even greater surprise, actually saw in him a young husband. But if this was one of the pictures of their past, she would definitely recognize this place, and this was absolutely not the case. And then the vision changed. Turhan, if it was him, of course. The young man in her visions stood before one of the windows of the throne room of the Imperial Palace on Centauri Prime, a room she would always recognize, and with a concentrated face he looked at the fire. Around his neck rested a golden chain, the main regalia of the Emperor, and before his eyes the capital of the Republic was burning. Smoke from numerous fires rose everywhere, and the destruction was visible even from such a great distance. The Centaurian's face showed stubborn melancholy, and a doomed readiness for something, agreement with fate. And behind his back, there Lady Morella saw herself, noticeably older than now. She found it difficult to name the exact time, but still. But a flash of light erased the image, and then she could no longer say anything definite. The vision blurred, and she saw a wild jumble, a heap of fragmentary moments, some of which, already seen by her earlier, told of events that had happened, some of some moments in the future, before the main prophecy, and some, she could not even roughly tie them to a series of years and eras. "Who are you?" the woman said quietly under her breath. "If it weren't for Turan's court telepaths, who sincerely believed that the Emperor's might had faded during that flight to Babylon 5, she would have sworn that her husband had somehow miraculously returned from the afterlife to what? She couldn't even guess. Perhaps her husband had a son, born out of wedlock and unknown at court? She wouldn't be surprised, but such a child would have very little chance of ascending to the throne. The seer had far more questions than answers. As was often the case on Babylon 5, events on the station followed a strict, sometimes thick, sometimes empty pattern. Mr. Morden was safely sent home by Sheridan, although I suspected that his luggage, thanks to the efforts of the vigilant Mr. Garibaldi, was almost more full of tracking devices than the luggage itself. If only there was any special meaning to that. The captain left my cabin after tea, with a slightly less square head than when he arrived. At least that was the impression I had.
And the station was filled with boredom. That's it, with all capital letters. The most surprising thing was that even the shadows and the Vorlons remained completely inactive, although it would seem that they should have been creaking gears and boiling pots at full blast. But no, Morton evaporated from the station along with his bodyguards with such speed as if he had his own hyperdrive below his back, and, gosh, the Vorlon ambassador locked himself in his cabin, leaving it only for short meetings with the same Sheridan. Although a couple of times accidentally finding myself nearby, I caught the extremely thoughtful look of the ambassador's eye on me, but he was not going to approach yet, demonstratively pretending that I did not exist at all. Curious. However, such inaction opened up excellent opportunities for self-development. More than a month ago,
the younger ones reported the completion of the full mapping of the great machine's interior on Epsilon 3.
Dral, who was sitting idly, either still did not notice the younger ones or arrogantly ignored their presence. The machine inspired, in addition to the far from weak, even by the standards of the older races, defensive complex, capable of fighting off even a large invasion fleet. The lion's share of the complex's design was sharpened to work with space-time movements. It seemed as if the entire machine was created specifically to send one specific space station far into the past for a strictly specific task. It looked like an owl on the globe, but given the almost complete lack of reliable information about the moment of creation of the planetary complex, it was perceived as quite plausible. In any case, the main thing was achieved. Now I had the full technical specifications of the great machine, all its units and systems, which meant it was time to build my own. With blackjack and whore, with pyramids and catgirls, yes. Smiling with anticipation, I gave the appropriate instructions to the younger ones, who by this point had accumulated a sufficient amount of free resources for the construction of such a large object. Really, there was no need to make the Great Machine verse 2 as huge as the original. The majority of the design was essentially occupied by the thermonuclear reactors that powered the systems, and in my case, everything was solved by one MNT generator, the energy output of which covered all costs with a huge margin. There was still the problem of control. The replicators had not yet been able to find a way to do without a telepathic operator, which caused a slight itch of irritation somewhere in the depths of myself, but I had to admit that the creators of the Great Machine, despite my not very respectful attitude to the level of technological development of the local inhabitants, were still noticeably smarter and more cunning than others.
Given my knowledge of the complete structure of the complex, I could, of course, make any of the system of the device work directly, with the help of a hammer and someone's mother, as they say, but for some reason incomprehensible to me, such an approach almost completely deprived me of the possibility of precise work, that is, in relation to the creation of time transitions. I did not have the ability to accurately determine the coordinates of the exit. But as they used to say on Earth in the past, for every smart ass, there is always a special bolt with a left-hand thread. Behemoth, an artificially created, completely organic, normal telepath, and a telepath with direct access to the replicator network. The approach I used first when creating maids for Alice and then for the brain-pecking cat has proven to be highly effective. So, no one is stopping me from following the same path with the complex I am creating.
And I have nothing to talk about with those who say that brains in a jar are crap. The only unknown quantity was still the Zatras species. Despite all the persistence of the search, despite all the meticulousness of the replicators, there was not a single mention of their creation and purpose in the Great Machine's database. There was no information, but they were intelligent. 10 alien Neanderthals engaged in the maintenance of a high-tech device of planetary scale, each of whom is a brother, or rather a clone, for the other 9. Even at the first study at the very beginning of my appearance here, it looked like a bad joke from a low-budget TV show. And after more thoughtful research and scanning,
The problem was that the replicators themselves saw no problem in the existence of these humanoid intelligent beings. Simply noting the fact of their presence and the cellular structure characteristic of high-quality clones created using technologies that were not inferior to the Asgardian technologies known to me. Asgardian technologies built entirely on the basis of existing technological solutions presented in the rest of the Great Machine. Feeling my eye begin to twitch, I once again singled out for myself a part of the Great Machine's scheme, defined by the younger ones as a cloning factory, looking closely at its structure. For all their colossal abilities for reverse engineering, the replicators were practically unsuitable for a creative approach, especially when something like associative thinking was required. But I saw, tell me, Korone, I send a part of the structure to Neki, marking the area that interests me. Am I hallucinating? Or are you seeing this too?
With a probability of 87.543%.
After a long pause, the girl responded through the replicator network. The existing structure has all the signs of using existing technologies in the replicator base, created on the basis of the local element base. But I don't understand the probability of the coincidence of existing approaches. The Neki's voice clearly expressed surprise and considerable bewilderment, which was not surprising. Somehow, the only module in the Great Machine complex, despite all the external similarities in design, was clearly created according to different principles. Despite all the common basic approaches, the architecture of the clone factory clearly gave off Asgardian technology. This looked like complete nonsense, considering that the only source of Asgardian technology in the observable galaxy, and what's more, the galaxy, the universe, was me. Unless, having identified the closest junior who had at least one Zatras in his field of vision, I launched the most thorough scan of the internal structure that was only possible under such conditions. Living organism, humanoid body structure, general physiological parameters, faint traces of secondary tachyon radiation. What? Fearing an irresistible urge to put my hand to my face, I sent another junior to scan the second Zatras, and another, and the fourth. All the individuals available individually gave the same readings. Clear signs of artificial construction of the organism, like behemoth, barely noticeable, but easily detected when you know what to look for. Marks of high-quality cloning and tachyon radiation, faint, barely detectable, but definitely indicating that each of the Zatras interacted extremely deeply with the source of these very tachyons. The only points in the structure of the Great Machine where the source of tachyons existed at all were the elements responsible for creating windows in time and for transporting objects into the past or future. But one Zathras that traveled to Babylon 4 could still retain traces of these very specific particles, but all Zathras at once? Continuing to consider crazy theories, I could only think of two options. Either they all traveled in time sooner or later, or all Zathras were the same Zathras, only taken from different points in their own timeline, and both of them caused me a tickling feeling of absurdity. In order to preserve the last of my own sanity, I left a note for the future to conduct a few additional tests if necessary, but for now I'll just pretend I didn't see any of this. 10 space Neanderthals. Maintaining a high-tech device capable of moving entire regions of space and all their contents through time, as well as organizing telepathic communication lines across galactic distances, no. Everything is fine. Everything is definitely fine. Korone, Yuki, transmitting over the network. It seems we should go get some fresh air. Lord Baal? Korone, who looked out of her part of the cabin in surprise, looked at me with extreme surprise on her face, exactly repeating the same look on the face of the second Neki looming behind her. I suppose you were drinking tea there again and carrying out a genocide of cakes. I suggest doing it a little more civilized and social. We agree, the girls interrupted me in chorus and through the replicator network. What? From them came a stream of fully formed, in the sense of full-fledged and inherent to any normal mind, emotions and thoughts, among which there was a wild mixture of light boredom, enormous gratitude, and a real desire to go somewhere together and have a good time. If earlier Korone, in fact, acted this way mostly because the program code of her personal matrix called for it, now for both girls it was a completely conscious and their own desire. And also, for some reason, only now I suddenly realized that Yuki and Korone were no longer an appendage of the community, as all the junior modules were in my perception. Neki were now two full-fledged individuals. Before you ask your likely question, the girl chuckled. There are no glitches in our personality matrices. We checked. I can assume, Yuki joined the conversation, that these are the consequences of the development of a full-fledged artificial intelligence, based on the personal matrices that you initially created. Feeling the whole spectrum of emotions is unusual.
As well as being aware of yourself, we simply support your desire, yes.
Korone raised her chin, slightly twitching the tip of her ear with an independent look. Do you finally understand that accusing me of being illogical and irrational was somewhat unnecessary? You won't get it. Korone snorted, but an emotion of amusement and malice came from her through the replicator network. Okay. I rise from the sofa with a smile. Are there any special preferences, or is the choice of the place up to me? Having exchanged satisfied glances, the Neks almost simultaneously took my hands and, maintaining satisfied expressions on their faces, dragged me along with them to the exit of the cabin and then along the corridor to the elevator. Well, we are responsible for those whom we created. What goes around comes around, and all that stuff. However, who said that I should resist and be against?
As I already noted, while they are not going to destroy the galaxy, I am extremely interested in what limits their self-development as individuals will reach. Having reached the park area, the Neks confidently pulled me to one of the establishments. A small restaurant with a very cozy street veranda, going out into a yard fenced on 3 sides with bushes, thus creating some semblance of privacy. We're going this way, Korone nodded contentedly. This place has some pretty good desserts, Yuki nodded, and they also have wonderful tea. Well, if you say so, I smile. Interlude. No, Veer. Londo Mollari walks next to his attaché, gesticulating vigorously. They can't even be compared. How can you try to compare anything with Dorva's compositions? Yes, Londo, Dorva is not bad, but… What do you mean not bad, Veer? Mollari threw up his hands, stopping in the middle of the corridor. He was the most brilliant composer on Centauri Prime. Just remember
the aria from The Staccato Hunt. The Centauri smiled dreamily, starting to hum his favorite part of the performance.
Beautiful aria, and you sing it perfectly, but…
Veer stubbornly shook his head.
But it can't even be compared to the aria from the opera Trantaro. This is… Well, remember…
Veer began to hum. A double chorus of voices echoed through the corridor of the station. The Centauri were clearly having a great time and were having fun. However, the figure with a deep hood thrown over his head that suddenly slipped out from around the corner was clearly not on the list of reasons for joy. Londo gasped softly and convulsively grabbed the stranger's hand that was wrapped around his neck.
How pleasant it is to die with a song on your lips, Mollari,
the attacker whispered ingratiatingly into the ambassador's ear.
Who are you?
Londo squeezed out of his disobedient throat with difficulty.
Your destiny, Pasoliati.
Pasoliati? Paso… Urza?
The man jumped up, finally recognizing the attacker. Londo, the speaker, was clearly smiling under his hood.
Urza!
Slipping out of the weakened grip, the Centauri ambassador pulled the hood off the grinning Centauri, squeezing him tightly in his arms.
It's nice to see your creepy face.
I'd like to see your face.
Don't joke like that again. For the love of all the gods, both my hearts will give out.
I thought you hadn't lost your vigilance. Urza smiled sarcastically.
Ambassador, who is this?
Oh, forgive me, Veer, Mollari said, turning to the attaché who was extremely pale with fright. Allow me to introduce my old childhood friend. This is Urza, Vocator Urza Jado, hero of the Battle of Gorash, and the best swordsman in Kuroprido that I know. Well, after myself, of course. Go to hell, snorted Jado. Urza, this is my attaché, Veer Koto. Londo introduced his companion with a smile. But these are all trifles. He's yes to… Better tell me, what are you doing here, on Babylon 5? What brought you here? There are some important matters, Londo. The Centauri shrugged. But I think we can discuss them in our old days when I come to visit you. Just let me rest after the flight. Although, not all is well at home, old friend. Not all is well. I don't understand, Londo frowned, exchanging a puzzled glance with Veer. Later, Urza shook his head. I need to change clothes and have a bite to eat. The doors of my cabin are always open for you. Mollari pressed his hand to his chest. I have no doubt, Pasoliadi. Grinning, the vacator clapped his friend on the shoulders and headed towards the elevator that had just arrived at the level, leaving the frowning Mollari behind. Londo? Veer called out to the ambassador cautiously. Something happened, Veer. I haven't seen Urza for several years, but… The man looked at his attaché. He had never been so tense and worried. Something happened.
But if there was something important, you would have been told, wouldn't you? So, the ambassador frowned even more. This something concerns Urza personally. Let's go, Veer. I need to contact the house. I need to find out at least something. He will, of course, tell me. Probably. But I want to know now. Of course, Londo, Koto nodded. Turning on his heels, Mollari walked quickly down the corridor towards the embassy cabin, continuing to run through in his head all the possible reasons for his old friend's behavior. The request sent to Centauri Prime made Mollari frown even more. For some unknown reason, very little official information had been obtained, but even from that, a very, very unpleasant situation emerged.
Urza Jado, the hero of the Centauri Republic, like his entire family, had been declared traitors.
This had not yet been announced by the highest officials of the state. It had not been approved by law. But everyone who was supposed to, of course, already knew about it. And they were just waiting for the go-ahead, the command, "Get it." Londo turned off the communication terminal, leaning back in his chair and looking straight ahead into nowhere. In light of the new data, the man's arrival on Babylon acquired a slightly different background, and the ambassador liked the situation less and less. "What, Londo?" Veer, sent in advance by the chief for wine and snacks, entered the cabin worriedly. "What did you manage to find out?" "Ah, yes, Veer." The man shook himself, casting a thoughtful glance at the attaché. "Did you bring what I asked for?" "Excellent. Put it on the table, please." "Londo?" The young Centauri repeated insistently, carefully placing a basket with 2 bottles and a container with small canapes on the table in the corner of the cabin.
I don't understand what's going on, Veer, Mollari sighed.
The new emperor, considers Urza Jado a traitor to the crown, and this? "How is this possible?" exclaimed Koto. "Is this some kind of mistake?" "I don't know, Veer. I should contact Lord Rifa. Maybe he knows more." This time it took much longer than usual to wait for an answer. It seemed that Refa was very, very busy with something. However, Londo waited patiently the whole time, and only his lips pressed into a thin line and the light, impatient tapping of his fingers on the tabletop revealed his true emotions. "Rifa!" Mollari threw up his hands in irritation when the face of the called party appeared on the display. "Finally, observing our common interests." He shrugged his shoulders phlegmatically. "Requires a lot of effort and time. What did you want, Mollari?" "Information has reached me that they are planning to declare Voctor Jado a traitor to the Republic. This is some kind of nonsense."
"This is not nonsense, Mollari. He is the traitor." "How is that even possible? Don't talk nonsense. Urza can be quite quarrelsome. He disagrees with some politicians, but a traitor. He would never betray the Centauri Republic. I can vouch for him. I hope," Rifa's face darkened, "that you haven't done something stupid by making a public statement about this, Ambassador Mollari." "No, but this is good." "Rifa, I demand that this absurdity be stopped. I'm afraid it's beyond our power. Besides, it's too late. The Emperor has decided everything. Do something. Urza is my friend. He is more than a friend. He is like a brother to me. His family has always supported the Republic, and I can't leave him in this situation." "So much the worse for you, Mollari." The Centauri leaned forward. "Understand, if you do this, the consequences for you personally will be simply terrible. The Jado family is declared traitors. Anyone who supports them will become an outcast in our society. Even I cannot protect you, although of course I will do everything possible, but if your relationship comes to light, you will not fit into our plans, Ambassador Mollari." "I won't fit into your plans," Londo exclaimed angrily. "Have you forgotten, Refa, who brought these plans into reality? And how exactly?" "Mollari, it is impossible to save the doomed, but," Rifa sighed, wincing. "I will try to do something." The ambassador's interlocutor's face showed extreme displeasure, but it seemed he could not ignore Mollari's words, at least for now. "Try your best, Rifa." Mollari grimaced and slammed the button, cutting off the connection. He was definitely starting to like what was happening even less than before. What was going on in the Republic if they wanted to declare one of its most loyal citizens a traitor to the motherland, and a traitor, anathematizing his entire family? "You know," Veer said with a smile, "at moments like these, I'm very proud that I'm working with you."
"Be careful, Veer," Londo grimaced. "Your compliments are making my head spin." "What will you do next?" "For starters," the ambassador sighed, "I'll drink everything you brought, together with Urza. I'll indulge in some wonderful nostalgia, and at the same time I'll find out all the details of the situation from his point of view that I can. And you contact my agents on Centauri Prime again. I need to understand what's going on at Tom, that things have reached such an absurdity." Urza came, as his childhood friend Londo Mollari had promised, with a massive wooden box under his arm, stood in front of the door of the embassy cabin and smiled, looking at Veer, who opened the door for him. "Please forgive the delay," the man nodded. "There were some urgent matters that needed to be settled." "What are you talking about?" The ambassador pushed aside Veer, inviting the guest inside with a welcoming gesture. "Come in, Urza, come in. And finally, tell me what's new at home." Even though I'm an ambassador, sometimes I start to think that I'm being kept in the dark. Sometimes you learn such news. Mollari, smiling broadly,
nevertheless looked extremely attentively and collectedly. The information he had managed to obtain by now was some worse than others. Urza Jado was indeed quite officially, and this was not someone's arbitrary intrigue, declared a traitor, and all because of his open rejection of the political course of the new emperor and his unwillingness to remain silent about it. Londo knew his old friend well, knew his character and how principled Jado was in many matters, but the ambassador could not understand such stubbornness when it came to the well-being of his entire family.
What can I say? The Centauri spread his hands, carefully placing the box he had brought on the table and waving away Veer, who leaned forward questioningly. Times are hard these days, Londo. Perhaps it's even good that you're staying here on Babylon 5. It saves you from having to deal with all this. The vocator grimaced. No, wait. Londo stopped his friend, twitching his cheek. Let's start with something more pleasant. After all, I haven't seen you for several years. Business, politics, all this can wait until we pour ourselves some breviary, drink a couple of cups and discuss all our acquaintances. You're right, Londo. Urza smiled and sighed as he sat down on the sofa, watching as Veer began to place jugs of drinks and snacks on the table. Tell me, how are things back home? How are the family, the kids? Are you still married to Marili? We get along well with her. Urza shrugged, taking the cup from Veer's hands. She understands me. The children are good.
The eldest daughter is already quite grown up. It's time to find her a worthy groom. The vocalist smiled dreamily, taking a big sip.
I'm happy for you, my friend. Although, Mollari looked slyly at his friend. I'm still jealous. If you hadn't passed me by then, who knows whose daughter it would have been, huh? So many years have passed, Pasoliati, and you're still there. Really? You still haven't found love? There was one. The ambassador waved his hand. A dancer, Adira. So why did the matter stop? It all ended very sadly, Londo sighed. As always. Silence reigned in the cabin. Both Centauri were thinking about their own things. Urza thoughtfully sipped his brevari, looking at his friend appraisingly, and Londo sat with his head down, his thoughts clearly returning to the girl. Or he simply continued to replay the current situation. Who knows? Suddenly Mollari laughed. Just think, he started whining because of his former passion, me. I need another drink. Mollari finished the contents of his cup in one gulp and began to pour more in a business-like manner. Well then, let's have a drink. Urza readily repeated his friend's actions. You know, Londo, the Centauri who had risen to his feet walked to the bar, thoughtfully looking at the bottles of drinks from the ambassador's personal supplies standing there. Your name has been heard often on Centauri Prime lately. Yes, the ambassador chuckled. And what are they gossiping about me? That your star is rising again, that the Mollari family will soon become even more influential than it ever was before, and with it, the Republic. It's about time. Centaur has been groveling before everyone for too long. It's time to show the galaxy our strength, and we've already started, with the thrice-damned Narn. But Emperor Turhan, may the gods be kind to him, did not want war. The Emperor? He was a good Centauri. And his death?
It is a loss for the entire Republic. But he was wrong, Urza. War was inevitable. The Narns left us no choice. But it wasn't the Narn who started the conflict. It was provoked by the bloodthirsty degenerates of our people. Jado grinned angrily. The same ones who killed Prime Minister Malachi and put the Emperor's nephew, that puppet Carthagia, on the throne. Wait. Londo frowned and looked at his friend. I was told that Malachi himself passed away. Officially, Urza looked at Mollari with a hint. It has become very difficult to find grains of truth in the incoming information now. Too many lies. Urza, why did you come to Babylon 5? The ambassador became serious and gestured to the pale Veer out of the cabin, turning to his interlocutor. Having seen the ambassador's attaché off with his eyes, Urza Jado slowly turned back to Londo, folding his arms across his chest. The vocator's face became extremely serious, collected, as if before jumping into the abyss. It was as if he was seeing his friend for the first time and was now assessing how much he could trust him, what exactly, and most importantly, how exactly he could tell him, and what not. In addition to all the other matters I have already mentioned, he finally began cautiously. I have come to you for help and support. You are no doubt aware already. The Emperor, together with his cabinet of ministers, is going to announce to all of Centauri Prime that Urza looked gloomily at the ambassador, and my entire family have betrayed the Republic. I found out today, but where is the evidence, Urza? They can't. It is the Emperor's decree, Londo. His word alone is enough. It is a mark, Londo. If they carry out their plan,
I will be dishonored, and my family will lose everything. How can I help? Molari rose to his feet. You've always been clever, and your family, the Molari family, is one of the most influential in the Republic.
If you come out in my support,
When I learned the details, the man looked at his friend with pain in his eyes. I was told in no uncertain terms that if I did this, they would wipe me out too. Lord Refa must learn more. I demanded that he... Refa? Uza recoiled. What business do you have with him? He's a friend. Friend? By all the gods, Londo. It was Refa who prepared the resolution on my account for the council. It was him. You. It's a mistake, Urza. Mulari threw up his hands in surprise. It's the truth, Londo. Knowledge is the main weapon of any politician, and I have it, but I couldn't even imagine that you would stand together with them. Why? I am doing my duty, Urza. I am returning the Republic to greatness. I am returning Centauri to the Golden Age. You are the hero of Gorash. I was a hero, but I saw and see too well what lies behind these words. Well, it means I have no choice.
our meeting did not go as I expected, but... Well, the vocalist sighed.
I brought you a gift, an old friend. A gift? I don't... Jado silently walked over to the box he had left at the very beginning, carefully lifting its lid. Only now did Londo finally recognize this chest. In exactly the same one at his home lay the award blade that he had earned with his own hands during the tournament in Kuroprido, where they had fought together. The sword. Urza carefully took out the weapon hidden in a leather sheath, turning to his friend and holding it out in outstretched arms. This is a Kutari. I fought with it in the tournament, and with it I passed Gorash, Londo. This was supposed to be a symbol of our alliance. The Centauri pulled the sword out of its sheath, admiring the reflections of light on the polished blade. But since this is now impossible, Jado's face distorted in anger, and he sharply raised the sword clenched in his fist.
According to the ancient laws of Kuroprido, I challenge you to Morago, Pasoliati.
With a booming sound, the sword was thrust straight into the wooden tabletop, going in halfway along the blade. This is the only way to save my honor and my family from your new friends. Londo! Vir ran in, excited by the noise. What's going on? I accept your challenge. The ambassador uttered the ritual phrase with a stony expression on his face. And I accept your gift, Skaltura. Then pray to all your gods, Londo Molari. Bring peace to your soul, and we will meet in 2 hours, as tradition demands. Urza turned sharply, bowed to Vir with a jerky movement, and without looking back, quickly left the cabin. He too had time to come to terms and harmony with himself, and prepare for the fight. Morago, a deadly duel of honor, in which the defeated lost his life, but under no circumstances could he lose his honor. A duel, only in which he, the vocator Urza Jado, hero of the Republic, could preserve honor for himself and dignity and a future for his kind. Chapter 48. A man sits in the doctor's waiting room and laments, I wish I were sick. I wish I were sick. The nurse can't stand it any longer and asks why he wants to be sick. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be healthy and feel so bad. Joke. Interlude. I don't like this. Stephen Franklin muttered under his breath with a heavy sigh. The display in front of the head of Babylon 5's medical service showed the statistics of fatalities on the station for the past week. The man had long ago taken to looking through this collection on a periodic basis in order to have an idea of the general situation in the territory entrusted to him, and at the same time to be able to predict new cases, at least in a minimal format.
And now he was extremely alarmed by the noticeably out-of-place increase in mortality among the representatives of the Markup race living on the station. 2 cases in 3 days, and all of them, without exception, due to natural causes. It would seem that there was nothing supernatural. Death from old age, asphyxia caused by a foreign body in the respiratory tract. Each of the cases separately could not have caused even the slightest suspicion or doubt. But 2 in such a short period of time. Franklin most likely would not have even noticed this, if not for the accidentally set filtering of statistics by species, which immediately brought out the overall picture from a completely different point of view. The medic once again ran his eyes over the data of the deceased, transmitted by Dr. Lazarin, the markup doctor on duty at the station, to the medical bay, frowned even more,
and sent part of the list to print.
No, the two events were still a coincidence, and every fiber of his soul was aching to show himself as an overly suspicious paranoid. But he still simply had to check, especially considering that the last incident had occurred no more than 6 hours ago. Having pulled the printout from the printer, Stephen quickly walked to the sector of the station allocated for Markab habitation. He reached the required level quickly, and at first glance everything was exactly the same there, as always. Rare inhabitants hurrying about their business, a barely noticeable smell of incense used by the Markabs in everyday life and carried along the corridors despite all the efforts of the recirculation system and the enhanced operation of the ventilation units. However, this was the least of the problems, since the smells were actually quite unobtrusive and quickly evaporated, rarely going beyond one level. "Excuse me," he stopped one of the aliens who was walking slowly towards him. "Yes?
How can I help? I'm looking for Dr. Lazaren. Ah, Markab pointed to the end of the corridor. I saw him enter cabin 174C half an hour ago. He might still be there." "Thank you." Franklin nodded and went in the indicated direction. He was lucky. The doctor was still there. In the semi-darkness of the room, an elderly Markab with a gloomy look was filling out a death certificate form, a small orange sheet of paper that was used by medical workers of this civilization, and which Stephen had already seen enough. The cabin was small, and therefore from the very threshold the man saw the culprit of the current situation, lying in bed and obviously dead Markab. "Stephen," Lazaren called out quietly to the medic, raising his eyes to the man who had entered. "Dr. Lazaren," nodded Franklin, coming closer. "Another case?" "We are all mortal, Stephen," the Markab shrugged. "Can I take a look?" The medic took a portable medical scanner out of his pocket. "I'll forward my conclusion to you." Lazarian shrugged. "I didn't think you could have reason to doubt it. It's not about doubts. All deaths must be confirmed, even those that seem completely ordinary." Markab just shrugged. Stephen nodded, carefully approaching the bed and starting his examination. However, after the first few seconds, he could say with almost complete certainty that he would not find anything unusual there. Just like in the two previous cases, his colleagues had not found anything. Not the slightest trace of bruises, injuries, or wounds. Everything looked as if the patient had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. A completely ordinary death from natural causes. Only Franklin knew perfectly well, like any doctor, that in fact, behind this formulation, as a rule, there was a huge list of those very reasons, which could be very different. He had been ill for some time. Lazarian spread his hands. Besides, he was already an elderly Markab.
Arduc. Потероман спонжимус растеми физдеом странних могрига сторожинек, постоме самые приермие драши у нас истити скуде.
Заня, Франклиния потоме. И я-то на не расхантрушо зашлет лео аро, катных левочит, о, я дольце прикослюшем бисредюры. Мини скаладу за зажентым рака плиета. А я на паста. Веду на пустынях это нар-мужиник. И ставши став со хараварных чису яда на мнеми хорой шади устанему заболса. А не, доктор, Лазаран. Обезление можает во в том шток. За так что рай явет на пустане, доктор Лазаран. Не опузывался и испожиник раса. Вяно очень изоление. Подагуананет ету насовал новой боли. И саразвы хатар-яйт, а такрита хтомы не в боли, а я ну что хатрита яйт. Нет церкусь ни нашего морния. Мы за их это наше не озаление. Мы не сани приадарукук захрасьяние, и не заисни ме доктора, и ми доктор форм.
But I would still like to perform an autopsy on this poor guy. Prepare to send him to the lab. With all my faith in your qualifications, everything looks too unusual. And I, unlike Mr. Garibaldi, don't like secrets. Lazaren could only shrug his shoulders, accepting the order of the doctor, who was completely within his rights. Indeed, if he thought about it for a moment, the deaths of the last few days were beginning to cause concern. If things were slightly different, he would certainly have thought about, no,
These were simply religious beliefs. At least, he hoped so with all his heart. Slowly nodding to Dr. Franklin, Lazarin looked at the body on the bed with a sad look and carefully began to blow out the candles standing by the wall, paying his last respects to the departed. No.
Still, the Zaros were not one and the same creature, the thought that continued to gnaw at me from within, nevertheless forced me to give the younger ones inside the great machine the command to mark each of these creatures and scan them all. The wild humanoids were indeed cloned, which, however, I had no doubts about. The module discovered in the structure of the complex, brought out into a separate room, connected to the rest of the passages by only one single passage, was a high-quality factory for the production of clones, the program of which was to maintain the population of Zatarus at the same level. The solution seemed very strange and illogical, but to control their number taking into account the possible movements of an individual beyond the planet, or even to another point in the time continuum, all the systems of the complex were used at full capacity.
It even looked so much like hammering nails with a microscope that I had no intelligible comments on this matter, except for one single and absolutely crazy thought, which I did not dare to voice to myself yet. In any case, the process of assembling the great machine on my territory was quite fast. After all, the replicators did not need to repeat absolutely all the transitions and structures of the original, designed to move the creators of the complex and maintain an ecosystem suitable for life for organics, just as there were no problems with the placement of a huge number of very powerful but excessively disadvantageous for their size thermonuclear reactor installations, of which, frankly speaking, 72.456% of the original Great Machine consisted. In my case, all the needs of the device were more than covered by a single M&T generator, which allowed the size to be reduced from the entire Epsilon 3 to an object with a diameter of only 300 kilometers.
Even I felt a little strange from such a cyclopean architecture, and my innate toad subtly hinted at completely unjustified expenditure of resources and demanded further optimization and improvement. But if I can build a huge space station and give it the shape of a sphere, then why not, right? And no, the sinister smile on my face and the imperial march sounding on the very edge of consciousness have absolutely nothing to do with it. Well, if we speak seriously, in such a large size there was undoubtedly a very pragmatic purpose. In addition to the main elements of the great machine, in this volume it was easy to find a place for any other technological solution available to the replicators: a hyperdrive, gravity generators, weapon systems, zones suitable for habitation,
And most importantly, due to its essence, this entire structure was simultaneously a huge 300-kilometer warehouse of resources and structural blocks that the replicators could use at any time for any needs that arose. Although the extremely suspicious flow of attention from Korone, quite clearly traced in the service data flows of the replicator network, very eloquently said that some people most likely would not believe this explanation. Interlude. With each passing minute, Dr. Franklin's bad premonitions were growing stronger. While he was still waiting for the results of the microbiological examination of the tissue samples taken from the last deceased Marcab, Stephen, obeying the intuition he had developed over many years of work, requested the bodies of the first 3 deceased in the second medical laboratory block.
Well, 15 minutes later, when he were transported to his box, all he could do was grip the metal tabletop with his fingers, feeling the stainless steel creak and, gritting his teeth, look into the electron microscope. And when he was told that there had been another death, with practice movements the medic took tissue samples, also placing them under the microscope. Now he already had an idea of where to look and what exactly to look for, and therefore a minute later, a whistling, doomed exhalation slightly muffled by a medical mask was heard throughout the laboratory box. All 4 dead aliens had the same signs, and despite the conclusions attached by Dr. Lazarin, the cause of their death was by no means from natural causes. Having saved the data to the computer, Franklin underwent a thorough decontamination procedure, which was guaranteed to destroy any microorganisms on the surface of the medical suit and exposed parts of the skin. But even after that, maintaining a gloomy expression on his face, the medic went to the shower, where he completely changed his clothes, sending the old set to the disposal and carefully washed off with a special solution everything that could still remain after the disinfection chamber. When such frequent deaths from the same unknown disease begin to occur in a confined space, and the results of the studies spoke about this very eloquently, no precautions can be called overly paranoid. Dr. Franklin, one of his colleagues, called out to him in surprise. Prepare the lab for possible quarantine, quickly.
Yes, sir. Taken aback for the first second, the doctor nodded convulsively and ran to the post to give the necessary instructions. Stephen himself exhaled, closed his eyes for a couple of seconds, and throwing on his uniform jacket, headed for the exit into the corridor.
Dr. Franklin, the communicator on the medic's hand quietly beeped. A group of medics is required at the 3rd Customs Terminal. A Markab transport ship with 200 passengers has been delivered. No signs of life have been detected. Your mother, the brigade is on the way. Feeling a chill run down his spine, Stephen ran out of the room, pulling out colleagues he met along the way, sending them to collect equipment and medical instruments. If the ship had what he thought it had, the station could be in big trouble. Tired and therefore quite dissatisfied, Sheridan went out to Customs Terminal number 3.
A group of station pilots, as he knew, had towed a markup ship that was not giving any signals to the Babylon, which was what they were actually going to look for, before meeting with Ambassador Delenn, who had invited him to some special Minbari dinner completely unexpectedly for the man. He had received a brief summary of the incident, compiled from the pilot's reports on the heels, but as he could see now, some kind of problems were starting to appear in what was happening. One of the Markabs, as far as he remembered, the chief physician of their diaspora on the station, literally stood across the passage with his chest, not allowing either the security personnel or the puzzled medics, called in accordance with the instructions, to get to the towed ship.
What's going on here? The captain sighed. The ship delivered by your people, the Markab stepped forward, is the property of Markab. I will not allow an inspection without the direct sanction of our government.
John raised his eyebrows. According to the report I have from the pilots who brought it here, the ship was drifting in the space of a neighboring system, not responding to signals. In such a situation, we have the right to protect national interests. Maybe you wanted to say the right to conceal the truth. Evil Franklin, accompanied by 3 more medics, this time in full biohazard suits. Do you even realize what you're doing, Dr. Lazarin? Doctor? Sheridan looked warily at the medic. We need to talk, Captain. The doctor turned to him. Dr. Franklin, Stephen, Lazarin sighed and dropped his shoulders. Are you against the inspection because you can guess what we will find there? What are you even talking about? Dr. Franklin? Dr. Lazarin? The shocked Sheridan looked between the sentient beings. 4 Markabs died on Babylon 5 in 3 days, Franklin said grimly. According to Dr.
Lazarin's findings, the causes were natural, however, the man sighed.
After careful examination of the tissue samples, I discovered that they had all fallen victim to some kind of plague. What the hell? The captain turned to Markab in shock. I demand an answer. How contagious is it, and what is the fatality rate? Fatal. 100%. Lazarin, who had clearly turned pale, looked at the people with a doomed expression. Contagious. 100%. Are you crazy to keep silent about such information, Commander Ivanova? Involuntarily recoiling from the alien, Sheridan raised his hand with the communicator to his mouth with a sharp movement. Ivanova speaking, Captain. Stop all transport traffic immediately. No ship is to leave or arrive at Babylon 5 until I give specific instructions. Sir? Came the surprised voice of a woman. Commander Ivanova, carry out. Code Lambda 99. All explanations later. First, close the station. Eat. Only workers in full protection are allowed on the ship. Franklin turned to the medics. The rest are no further than the airlock. Michael, run to the lab, take a couple of assistants and bring quarantine equipment here. Sterilizers, boxes, a temporary airlock. You know, I don't know how much the disease has spread throughout the station, but I don't want us to bring in more sources of infection with our own hands. I'll do it. One of the medics nodded sharply and ran to the elevators. Lazarin. Franklin, now extremely focused, turned back to the Markab medic. Can the disease be transmitted to other species? You know what it is. Is there a cure? We don't talk about it. What? Are you crazy? Dr. Lazarin, if your silence could pose a threat to the station, I must know. Captain Sheridan, Dr. Franklin, it is a very old disease.
It has already manifested itself in the history of the Markabs many centuries ago.
The chronicles record that the epidemic broke out on the island of Draffa, a well-known place of concentration of all possible vices and free thinking. Then, everyone considered the disease a punishment from our gods for an immoral way of life. The Markab spoke, growing darker with each word. It was named after the island it destroyed. She didn't go beyond the island? Stephen asked, surprised. The weather conditions isolated the island. Not a single ship docked there for almost 2 months. When the sea finally calmed down, Lazarin sighed. It turned out that the disease killed everyone, the entire population of Draffa. There was no one to pass it on to. Exchanging glances with Sheridan, the medic thoughtfully rubbed his chin with his fingers. Then we thought that the disease was gone. Damn it, you're a doctor, Lazarin. Franklin threw up his hands. Any disease can lie dormant in its hosts for years without showing any signs. It can mutate, Be transmitted to other species. Why didn't you take action?
It became a religious boogeyman, not just a disease. Lead a righteous life or the curse of Draffa will overtake you. A Markab quoted someone. It was believed that only immoral Markabs become its victims. Madness. Stephen, Captain Sheridan. New victims appeared on Markab a year ago. The family of the first victim was scared by the rumors. They hid the true cause of death. When it became known, it was already too late. Relatives became infected. Everyone believed that their misfortune would pass them by, and they did not stop communicating. The plague of Draffa began to spread, and the transporter, Franklin, without interrupting the conversation, nodded to Michael, who had returned, taking the biological protection suit from him, and immediately began to put it on over his regular clothes. Everyone thought that this was a punishment from the gods to our entire world. They hoped to leave the damned, reject the vicious people and be saved. It didn't work out. There were so many ships. Now, the virus is everywhere, the captain exhaled. Yes, Captain. Lazarin, if you knew about everything a year ago, Franklin's eyes showed confusion. Why didn't you tell us? I could have helped create a cure, help avoid all these deaths. I was ordered to remain silent. Stephen, we were all ordered to remain silent. The leaders were afraid that the people would perceive this as a sign of divine wrath. We tried. The burst of activity ended. Now the doctor spoke very quietly, barely audible, his head down. They tried to find a cure, to defeat the plague. But without money, without resources, they wouldn't even listen to us, as if the very mention of the disease could defame their image. If you were studying the disease, Stephen paused, holding up the suit's sealed helmet.
You should have checked. Can it infect other species? Is it only dangerous to Markabs or...
I don't know, Stephen. May the gods forgive me, but I don't know.
Then I'll have a lot of work to do.
Franklin sighed, finally putting on the suit helmet. Captain, I'll keep you informed.
Of course, Dr. Franklin.
Sheridan nodded. If you need additional people, please contact me. Give me at least an hour to collect the initial data. Then we need to call an emergency meeting of the heads of services. The captain nodded and turned on his heel, heading off to give orders and make them official. Now, with the lives and health of everyone on board at stake, Franklin was effectively in charge. But bureaucracy was relentless, which meant Sheridan would have a lot of paperwork.
Некоторые действительно их, но знабочим го обличания и разгрубания, него гей дали лиц, то что и полилие, полисталие не, и то не яле, и это на балио не видео цене, поэтому жле двотына мацеле. Та греваю ся вымиряни, дьявле, Шеридан, вырня с хрота бокриновной. А то мне влиятание, а там не влия, заваля дневле, а там не влиятание, а там не влиядалена, заболе далеена, заболе, ина. Это уже 200. Заболе, завалена, заболе, ознавалия, забалия. Нажещем, булены,
умавний там, Иран, лятом, омомо, азалия ранор, санчелиника врамет, залия, синя, залия, залия. Новоление, асейлия, нахайлия, зивинаха, асейлия, наха, заленаха, залена, заленаха, заленаха. На Бабилон, равьюром, разуане, залени.
For a few seconds, Stephen simply stood silently before his assembled colleagues, leaning tiredly against the back of his conference room chair. Finally, the man sighed and walked around the table, handing out a printout to each person with a brief summary of the data available at that moment. We have only 24 hours to prevent the epidemic, but I'll be honest, the chances that we'll make it in time are, in my opinion, extremely low. This means that we need to prepare not for prevention, but for the elimination of the consequences. The incubation period of the disease, according to Dr. Lazarin, lasts several days, but as soon as the patient shows the first symptoms, he has 24 hours left. And there is no salvation? Ivanova spoke up. At the moment, no. The main reason, besides high contagiousness, is that in such a short period of time from the onset of symptoms to death, it is extremely difficult to create a model of how exactly the disease works.
Do we know how many have already been infected?
Garibaldi frowned, reading the lines of the medic's report. There is no exact data, but I would think that everything, considering the conditions, the entire colony of Markabs on the station is infected. And the other inhabitants? Were you able to find out whether the disease is dangerous for other species? The most difficult question, Captain. Stephen shook his head. Dr. Lazarin has no information. As you have already heard, It is impossible to say, based on the samples we have at the moment. We do not even know for sure how it is transmitted through the air, through blood or other liquids. If the latter, we have a chance even with general contagion. If the former, the air on the station is recirculated. Yes, there are filters that clean the incoming gas mixture from contaminants and known pathogens, but... The man sighed.
The key here is known, and we know practically nothing about the Drava plague. An oppressive silence reigned in the conference room. Each of those present was digesting what they had heard. Not the most pleasant end to a working day that had already dragged on past midnight, especially in light of the potential we're all going to die. Doctor, Sheridan exhaled heavily. You're in charge here. Do you have a plan of action? All Markabs on the station must undergo examination. At least then we can separate the healthy ones, if there are any left. There will be a huge scandal, Garibaldi grimaced, lifting the sheet with the report. They will scream that we are insulting them. You know how it is when it comes to other people's religious quirks. We have no other choice, Michael. We need to know how far the infection has spread, and at the same time, try to find patients at an early stage so that we can track the development of the disease.
What symptoms do we take into account?
Dizziness, sore throat. Stephen began to list. Low blood pressure. Inflammation of the lymph nodes. In the later stages, the disease affects the central nervous system, blocking nerve transitions, respiratory processes, and disrupting heart contractions. Then, within 24 hours, paralysis and death occur. Commander Ivanova. Sheridan sighed heavily, handing the woman several forms. As I said, from this moment the station is under quarantine. I have issued the order. Until we know how dangerous the disease is, no ship is to leave or arrive at the station. Got it, the woman nodded. Although there will be big problems with the arriving transporters. So we'll refuel them, supply them with food, and send them back to the nearest transport hubs. Any reasons to explain? Yes, the captain nodded. It will increase the risk of panic, but there will be unrest in any case. Garibaldi finished for captain. I will instruct my people. Or maybe we should move the Marcabs to one section? The woman from the supply service spoke up. No, Franklin shook his head. That would only make things worse. If the disease is spreading through the air, then only one of the airlocks would save us, and they are too small for all members of the species. Besides, if only the Marcabs are in danger, keeping them in one room would only speed up the spread of the infection. I would be more worried about something else, Garibaldi chuckled. It would be enough to leak just one rumor that there is Black Death on board the station, and immediately there would be general panic and hysteria. Everyone would be looking for a scapegoat, and it is not difficult to understand who exactly this goat will be appointed. If we isolate the Marcabs, we can protect them. But if they get infected, they will die. Otherwise, they'll die from an iron pipe in their head, the security guard shrugged.
Or a knife in the stomach. Doc, I'm not disputing your medical knowledge. I'm just voicing the highly probable outcome of the situation.
Too many unknowns. Sheridan shook his head. Until we have... Wait, Ivanova interrupted the captain. Perhaps we should turn to other races? If not for a cure, then at least for diagnostic methods? I'm sure they have methods more advanced than ours. And why does it seem to me that everyone immediately thought of our lover of golden pyramids? Garibaldi muttered under his breath, involuntarily recalling how he himself suddenly woke up in a golden coffin under the uncomfortable gaze of the smiling Goa'uld ambassador. That's a difficult question, Stephen drawled thoughtfully, nodding in agreement with the woman's proposal. Lord Baal, if we are talking about him, told me, when he arrived at the station, that his species is not susceptible to any disease. All my medical knowledge is categorically outraged by such a formulation of the question, but in the months since his arrival, I have not received a single piece of evidence that he or his assistants have even had a cold. Just as I have no idea how they achieved this effect. A technological achievement? Genetic manipulation? Evolution? No idea. Dr. Franklin spread his hands. But we can ask. Indeed, Doctor, Sheridan nodded. That sounds reasonable. If not, Lord Baal, I would at least appeal to the members of the council. I understand you, Franklin nodded. I'll do my best. In that case, I suggest we finish for now. It's very late. We should all get at least a few hours of sleep. Otherwise, we risk doing something so bad that an epidemic would be better. Okay, Captain. I'm waiting for your reports, thoughts, and suggestions tomorrow. Today, John corrected himself. In the morning. Another exclaimed Urine. If you all be gone, in that piece of echoings, Dr. Franklin. Having become engrossed in the Zatras of mystery, I somehow failed to keep track of when Captain Sheridan managed to declare a quarantine on Babylon 5 due to a biological threat of the highest category, how the Lambda 99 code, which Ivanova had put into effect on his orders several hours ago, was fully deciphered. I mean, I vaguely remembered that the original series showed several episodes, during which such procedures made sense, but in this part, unlike the fundamental events, I remembered the details precisely that vaguely and very superficially. Not that this quarantine affected me personally in any way, especially considering the presence of a personal gate in the back room, but something told me that... Lord Baal. A call signal came from the terminal on the table, and on the screen, after picking up the phone, the haggard and tired face of Dr. Franklin appeared. I apologize for calling so early. Could you spare me a little time for an important conversation? Dr. Franklin? I raise an eyebrow in surprise. Of course, if you have something urgent, and judging by your appearance it really is, I'm all ears. Thank you, the man nodded. Tell me, Lord Baal, at the very beginning, when you first arrived at the station, I invited you to a standard medical examination, which is undergone by representatives of all delegations arriving at Babylon 5. But I refused, I nod, because I don't see the point in it. True. And then you said one phrase, the medic clearly hesitated, that your species is not susceptible to diseases. I understood you correctly, didn't I? That's right, Dr. Franklin. I nod again, smiling slightly. My species is indeed not susceptible to diseases in your understanding of the word. Viruses, bacteria, I shrug, have not been a problem for many centuries for, citizens of the Empire. I still can't believe it, Steven shook his head sighing. But I suppose you wouldn't just say that, tell me, Lord Baal, is this property, is the feature of your biology? How did you get it? Do you have such a strong immunity? I tilt my head thoughtfully. You are clearly not asking out of idle curiosity. That's right, Lord Baal. 6 hours ago, Captain Sheridan declared a quarantine on Babylon 5. The station is closed to all ships, both departing and arriving. The matter is very serious, so I ask you to answer my question. Do you really have such a strong immunity? I accept your honesty, Doctor. This feature is not immunity in the literal sense of the word.
The fact is that many centuries ago, one scientist of my people created special nanorobots, the main purpose of which, after appropriate programming of course, I shrug my shoulders, carefully monitoring Franklin's reaction to my words, is to maintain the host organism in a perfectly healthy state from the point of view of its personal genetic structure. Nanites? The medic exhaled in shock. That is, nanites. I nod. All foreign organisms that enter the body are recognized by them as an aggressive agent and destroyed. Exactly the same thing happens in the case of injuries or damage to DNA. Nanites strive to return the body to the template embedded in them. Of course, I shrug with a smile. This is not absolute protection, but in my entire life, let's say I have never encountered anything that could harm me. I have never even had a cold. Damn it.
Franklin's face showed that he couldn't believe what he had just heard, and at the same time he understood perfectly well what I had just said, knew what it meant, and he really wanted to do the same. The most curious thing is that I didn't lie a single word. After all, in my organism, there really are many nanites that seek to return the body to the embedded template. And I really haven't encountered anything that could harm me, at least not unless I tried to dive into a star. Dr. Franklin. Yes, the medic shook himself. Forgive me, Lord Baal, it's just medical nanorobots. We had developments, theoretical calculations, but the working technology... Forgive me again, it was just unexpected. Tell me, is it possible somehow? Unfortunately, no. I shake my head, perfectly understanding what the doctor is getting at. The nanite injection is given to every citizen of the Goa'uld Empire at birth.
И ждосы программтиста аскахоста, что понять максимумы efficiency. Именно с видеолинии или еще рублимфи болище, заяройнись мы или шо нему программаная она еще не мина. Well, Стивен сваной ади если вранием. Иставжение. I understand, Lord Baal. I apologize for disturbing you. Также у нее лишь чтобы имя на инагроге, лишь try to help. Epidemicany laski station is blawniany narkiatrubum, a skazawiażenia perfectly well. Thank you for the offer. Really. I can't even imagine how exactly you can help us. In any case, I hope you find a solution to this problem. Thank you, Lord Baal. Franklin nodded and hung up. You could have given them more active assistance. Korone transmitted over the network, half questioningly. Knowing your penchant for unreasonable actions, I am rather surprised that you did not do so.
Based on the data available in the station's database, the technologies available to the replicators could easily develop a cure for the Drapha plague. Knowing your usual attitude towards my decisions, I smile, I should be the one feeling surprised. Your question sounds too much like a veiled desire to help the station's inhabitants. These are just your speculations. An emotion came over the net, accompanied by an indignantly proud snort and an image of a Neki with her chin raised. And this does not answer my question. Yes, I am perfectly aware that I could solve this problem. But I do not intend to take on the role of a supervisor, and this will inevitably happen if I solve all their problems indiscriminately. Besides, Dr. Franklin himself is capable of solving this riddle. A surprisingly balanced and logical point of view. Korone still couldn't resist making a sarcastic joke, continuing the usual theme of the absurdity of my decisions.
After communicating with you for so long, I could catch even more